Hello and good evening, everyone. We are here tonight for the purposes of a public hearing. I'm going to start off the meeting called to order at 6:31 p.m. I'm going to read the notice that was in the local newspapers. Town of Southbridge, public hearing. A public hearing will be held by the Town Council on Monday, December 4th, 2017 at 6:30 p.m. in the McKinnon Council Chamber, Town Hall, 41 Elm Street. The public hearing will be held pursuant to Chapter 40, Section 56 on the adoption of a residential factor for tax purposes and the adoption of percentages of the local tax levy to be borne by each class of real and personal property. Any person wishing to speak will be given the opportunity to be heard. With that, tonight we're going to have a presentation as normal by our assessor. I'd like to call up our town assessor, Wilfred Canoyer, up to the microphone for purposes of a presentation.
Good evening, everybody. I won't be doing a full presentation here. I will be doing one for the council before you take the votes that you need to do. But I will cover the highlights of this year's tax situation. Okay. So very quickly, this year we had new growth in the community of about $20,802,000. And that allowed the town to levy an additional $427,000 in property tax to new taxpayers on new properties or improved properties. So in addition to that, we also revalued all of our properties, brought them all to fair market value, which we do every year. So the new town value this year is $975,301,000. Okay. So using the tax levy this year is going to be $20,237,501. If you divide that number by the total town value that I just mentioned, that will yield a tax rate this year of $20.75 per $1,000 valuation. Under Proposition 2.5, we have to, we're constrained by how much in property taxes we can raise each year. This year, the calculations under Proposition 2.5 allow the town, if they were to so choose, to raise $21,048,531. Obviously, the $20,237,000 that I just talked about in the tax levy is less than that, so if we meet the constraints of Proposition 2.5, and that leaves an excess levy capacity of the difference between those two numbers of $811,000 in additional property tax that the town could have levied if they chose, but they chose not to. So classification, what does that mean? It allows the town to split the tax rate between the various classes of property. Historically, Southbridge has had a tax rate of 1.0, which is a single tax rate. But if they were to choose, they could split it. So in your packets, we've done up some shifting scenarios for you. But just to go over in general terms, with a single tax rate, the average single-family property owner, the average single-family house, is going to pay $3,574 in property tax. The average commercial property is going to pay $11,147, and the average industrial property is going to pay $11,339. So the law allows the town to shift that. That's a factor of one. If we were to shift it to the maximum allowable by law, you could shift to the commercial 50%, but because of the the high percentage of residential, it would have a very lower effect on the residential. So if we were to shift it to the maximum available amount, right now the average residential is $3,574, I just mentioned. If we shifted it the maximum, the average residential could go down to $3,035. That's a difference of, what, $535 approximately. But to do that, the average commercial property would go from $11,147 to $16,724, which would be a 50% increase. And the average industrial would go from $11,339 to $17,011. Again, a 50% increase. So, and we could shift it that or any amount in between or not at all, which is the recommendation of the Board of Assessors. That concludes my presentation, and turn it over.
Thank you. And I want to start off by giving citizens any opportunity to ask any questions they would like about. If you come up, please just state your name and your address, general address, for purposes of the record, please.
Mike Marchetti, 120 Marie Avenue. I guess I don't understand the hearing tonight because he didn't really make any presentation. I guess we'll have to wait. I'll wait for the town council meeting. But my question is this a tax increase this year, or are you increasing the taxes this year?
Ted, yes, please. I would ask Jim, if you're listening, if you could turn up the volume on the speaker's microphone, that'd be very much appreciated.
Okay. I'm not increasing the taxes. The tax levy is going up. The tax levy is going up. And bear with me a moment. So this year's tax levy is going to be $20,237,501, which I mentioned. Last year's tax levy was $19,194,079. That's an increase of $1,043,000, or 5.44%. However, and you have it in your packets, and I will be detailing this in the full presentation, the new growth this year is $427,914. Again, that's new properties which bring in additional taxes that weren't there last year. So that kind of mitigates some of the effect of it. So the change after the new growth is $615,507, or 3.21%. And this is similar to what was presented at budget time, except for the new growth is higher than expected, so the increase is actually less than expected.
So just to be clear about that, the original, at budget time, the original tax increase was proposed at 3.96. Now, because of the new growth, the expected tax rate change will be 3.21. And as I said, most of that is as a result of lost revenue from the landfill account. There's a big chunk of why that occurred.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate the information. As I've said before, I don't mind paying my fair share in taxes. As long as everyone's paying their fair share, I don't have a problem with that. The only thing that I get a little annoyed by is the fact that I don't see any reason why this presentation could not have been on the town website ahead of time. I wanted to look at it, study it, digest it, but it wasn't there. I went on the town's website over the weekend. I saw last year's presentation, but not this year. And I'm not making a big deal out of it. I'm just saying I would appreciate it if these were on the town's website ahead of time so we can look at it. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else who would like to address the town council? Is there anyone else, again, who would like to address the town council to the hearing? Well, I guess the council member is going to ask questions of the assessor during the actual presentation during the town council. With that, I would like to close the public hearing. The public hearing will be closed at 6:40 p.m. Thank you, everyone. I gotta get that mic turned up. I can't.
Good evening and welcome to the Town Council meeting of Monday, December 4th. It's 7 p.m. here in Council Chambers. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Councillor Auclair.
Present.
Councillor Carrasco. Councillor Clements.
Present.
Councillor DePietro. Present. Councillor McKenzie.
Present.
Councillor Manna.
Present.
Councillor Morales.
Present.
Councillor Nash.
Present.
Councillor Steves.
Present.
8 present.
Thank you. Agenda item number 3, consider and accept the Town Council meeting minutes of November 20th, 2017.
So moved.
Second.
Any corrections, additions, deletions? So I have one. On the second page, under agenda item number 6, Town Manager's announcements, it says, Mr. Sanangelo said the firehouse feasibility study is done and will come forward soon. It should be the firehouse RFQ. The RFQ for the feasibility study is finished. Okay. Anybody else? There's one other. Okay. All set with the amendment then? Great. Mr. Handvote, all those in favor as amended? Unanimous. 8. Agenda item number 4, subcommittee summaries, relevant minutes to be read at each agenda item. We will start with A, General Government. Councillor Steves.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We met on November 28th. The big item of our agenda for that night was the Riverside Park project, which we're going to be talking about later tonight, so I'll save that one. But we also talked briefly about starting a discussion on town council goals, which was brought up primarily by Councillor Nash. And so we threw around a bunch of ideas regarding that. And we will continue that discussion to set that discussion going forward on the idea of dovetailing what we're trying to do with what the town manager is trying to do and other things that we think need to be done policy-wise. We also started a discussion on post-landfill closure issues, which, well, I guess we didn't start. We've kind of been touching on it a little bit lately, but we need to do some more digging into that area. And that's all I have for the moment. The Riverside Park grant will come up later.
Thank you.
Oh, and we do tentatively have a meeting scheduled for the 13th. It'll be a joint meeting with P&D, and the agenda hasn't been set yet, though.
All set?
Yep.
All right. 4B, Department of Public Works, Councillor DePietro.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Caught me by surprise out of order here. But we had a meeting which essentially was based on preparing for this season's snowstorms. The consensus of the meeting really was to approve 2 additional contractors with equipment. That's attached in your summation that I handed over, as well as 2 additional folks that will be running the town of Southbridge's equipment for approval. In both cases, Heather mentioned to us that she was short for both folks with equipment and at least one that we like to have on standby in one of our smaller trucks. She also alluded to a well-documented memorandum that she had sent to the town manager regarding an additional, not a ton of money, but times 12, I guess it is, $1,913.57 per month, unanticipated at the time because 2 new pump stations were not in operation, and maintenance and upkeep of those were in question at the time. Now that they've been running, these folks, our contractors, are asking for additional funds. But a tremendous job she did trying to explain it. If you do the math, it all makes sense, which again is attached in your packets. And again, Heather is hoping that some additional folks might step up to the plate and help us with at least one for hopping in one of our trucks, and certainly several for the bigger trucks with the plows. We have a shortfall this year, according to her, and that's a concern. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, 4C, Education and Human Services, Councillor Nash.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you. Our last meeting was on November 20th, same night as Council, so the topic from that meeting has already been covered by Council, and we do not currently have any meetings scheduled. Thank you.
4D, Planning and Development, Councillor Clare.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you. On November 30th at 6:30, we had a meeting in the Veterans Room. The two items that were discussed, one is on tonight's agenda, I believe, for the reclassification of, agenda item number 18, to change the zoning designation, so we can talk about that at that time. The other item that we had on the agenda was a presentation and update of the master plan project as of November 14th, 2017, which was one of Mr. Sanangelo's goals to provide a presentation of the, an update of the master plan process a few times throughout the year. And I'm just going to read a summary. The actual document that he worked off of will be included in the minutes, so if anybody's curious about the full document, just request and we can provide you with that. So here it is. So Mr. Sanangelo presented a comprehensive update of his work this year on the master plan. He is utilizing project planning software on a shared platform with his department heads who are also working towards assigned goals in a timely fashion with set progress dates. He went through the document and highlighted the applicable changes from the last presentation and read. Mr. Sanangelo went over his work on the Riverside Park. The council unanimously allocated funds to build in 2016. It will be going before council on 12/4/17. He went over progress with his department heads in finding state grant money for local projects, including work done by Steve Roenfeld with the PARC grant that he was awarded this year. He also explained that the town is working with the Mass Works program to fund retention efforts with United Lens by procuring a $418,000 grant to help with some infrastructure. He also has been working closely with the state to focus on repairing the Southbridge school system, its funding sources, and ultimately its reputation. He is also working to streamline the permitting process for builders and developers with Kenneth Comia and other department heads. He also mentioned the work that has been done at the airport with the new hangar, restaurant, and recruiting new tenants for the Old Flight School. He went over his progress with the Substance Abuse Council, Red Ribbon Week, and the Chris Herron event at the high school. Currently, the $25,000 allocated to reduce the effects of the opiate epidemic has not been spent, but the initial thoughts are that the funds should be utilized for prevention and programs for the youth in town. Mr. Sanangelo spoke about cross-marketing efforts within the tri-community area. Sturbridge is a hub for tourism, and he is looking for ways to capitalize on their success in that aspect, and hopefully someday Southbridge will be day number 2 on stops to Central Mass. He went over the removal of several distressed properties and some that are slated to come down, the Latino Parade, and his progress with the Green Communities Program. At the end of the presentation, he fielded questions from councilors, and Mr. Sanangelo asked if he had satisfied the requirement of his goal as laid out in his goals and objectives. Councilor Morales stated that the update was comprehensive and very detailed. Councilor Steves had a few questions about some summary items and whether they should have been in the update, and Councilor Claire stated that she felt this was satisfactory as well, and then the meeting was adjourned at 8:15 p.m. Thank you.
4E, protections of persons and property. Councilor Manna.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have no meeting minutes and no meetings planned. Thank you.
Agenda item number 5 is Chairman's announcements. I have a few. First and foremost, I want to send a big thank you out there to everybody who participated in the tree lighting event and the Santa Parade. I especially want to thank our police department and the auxiliary police who came out that evening to make sure everybody was safe and traffic moved swiftly and safely through town. The fire department and the DPW department members who came out on their days off and drove vehicles and participated with family members. It was interesting to see a car seat in one of the fire trucks, but there were rules. As Chief DeFranzo said, if you want to bring your child in that fire truck, it's got to be safe. So it was really great to see that they embodied the real community spirit and brought their families with them and participated in that event. We estimate about 600 people on the Common. Wonderful event, great weather, brought the people out, and again, kudos to Southbridge Cultural Council, to DJ Ace of Spades, Judy Ferguson from Village Photo, who did the pictures, Bill Belanger, who not only drove his train, again, with Happy Riders, but who also provided food on the Common, which was a sellout. Apparently, everybody was hungry that night. And the Southbridge Conference Center, of course, with their cocoa and their cookies as usual. So many people to thank. I've posted a notice. I've actually asked the town manager. He posted a thank you letter to everybody, and I hope you get a chance to look. We are truly grateful for all those who participate and make this community spirit one here in the holiday season. So thank you, all of you. I would like to note to the council members that Councilor Nash has been pursuing a water treatment plant tour He sent us some back and forth, the vice chair and myself, in terms of planning that treatment tour, and if anybody would like to participate, it's being scheduled. Steve from the water company is willing to do that for us. It's scheduled for Monday, the 11th at 11 a.m. It will be just for the treatment plant, and if anyone has time and the weather holds, and if you'd like to actually look at the reservoirs, they're willing to also go out to the reservoirs. So if you're interested, just let one of us know, and we'll make sure that there's a count so they're prepared as to how many people might be able to do that tour. Let's see, Plow Drivers, you mentioned, you heard Councillor DePietro mention that there was discussion at the DPW meeting. We are still in need of more plow drivers. If you are interested, that packet can be obtained from the manager's office with all the details of what the town requires, but there certainly is more room for plow drivers. And having said that, you need to be mindful, our community needs to be mindful that with a reduced force in place, that when the snow comes, have some patience. Remember that most of the time, even award-winning we are in terms of our roads and plowing, it takes time. And we've always done a great job. It may take a little extra time this year. They will come out making phone calls, and ruffling feathers is not going to get them there any sooner. So if you just have patience when the time finally arises, hopefully we won't have to worry about that for a long time. My bet is next year, and that this year is a very dry winter. But in the meantime, patience, and if you know of anybody who might be interested, tell them to come on down to the town hall and pick up their packet to become a plow driver. Let's see. I do have a question. Last meeting we talked, we were informed by the police department about the need to replace some retired police and the proactiveness that our chief is pursuing that, and we funded that last meeting. I'm concerned a little bit about the fire department and whether or not we are taking any steps there. I know that there's retirements coming there. There's been some people out. I know we have a service person leaving. I'm very concerned, Mr. Town Manager, and I would like for you to maybe take a look at that and talk with the chief about and what his plans are. I know that there's one position open that has not been filled as of yet. What is the progress on that? The night of the Vienna fire, there was concern, we were short-staffed, and we've been short-staffed right along. And many councils in the past have supported the fire department and gotten us up to 6 men fulfillment here, making sure that the shifts were six people, men and women, I should say. And it doesn't do us any good if we budget for that and we don't actually proactively seek out employment opportunities for any more workers. So I'd like you to look into that for us and give us an update when that's possible. I'm trying to think. The other thing to remember is alternate side parking. Speaking of snow, I meant to say that when we were talking about snow. Yes, we have it. Just so you know, it's on our website. You can find the parking ban information. Beginning on December 1st, ending April 1st each year, between 7 and 7 p.m., parking shall be allowed only on odd-numbered side of any town way, odd-numbered days, and on even-numbered side of any town way on even-numbered days. No vehicle shall be parked or left unattended except in accordance with this regulation. If you don't understand this, you have any concerns, call the town hall, ask the police, but don't get yourself stuck in the situation where you're towed or you get parking tickets, because we will do that. It's a safety issue for the town to be able to get around with those large trucks and to get your streets plowed and safe for you. So please pay attention. There's a very long list of what streets it affects. Look on the website for the list. Come in and pick up your own copy. I don't know what else to tell you, except it's something that has been done in this community for a long time, alternate side parking, and then there's the snow emergency situations as well. Obviously, when we have a large snowstorm, snow emergency takes effect, and then everybody is more affected for parking. So please be mindful of that in the winter season. And that's all I have for tonight. So moving on to agenda item number 6, town manager's announcements.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you for reading that last notice. It saved me some time, and thank you. It did it very well. I do want to make an announcement on behalf of the tax collector treasurer. There is a town-ordered auction on property that has been foreclosed upon. You might see something like this. I don't know if you could see it, but you might see this around town. It says town-ordered auction, Southbridge, Thursday, December 14th at 3 p.m. Auction, two-family home, 132 Hartwell Street, 0.56 acre parcel, Clark Street. Total 4 properties held at Town Hall, 41 Elm Street. This live public auction highlights a two-family home at 1 32 Hartwell Street, and a .56 acre site on Clark Street with a development potential. Also included is a .57 acre land parcel at 0 South Street and a multi-use building to be demolished at 143 South Street. It's being held by the normal real estate group, ZecoGroup.com. Again, you'll see this information all around Town Hall. I'm sure that the tax collector assessor has it up on the website as well. Secondarily, I wanted to give town council members some information. Please just pass that down. I would have loved to have this in the packet, but it was something I've been working on the last couple of days, and it really just wasn't ready. One of the things that the town council has asked me to work on throughout the 2 years is finding additional revenue outside of the normal town budget process. And I know recently, you may be aware, I haven't seen it yet in the telegram, but the town just recently received a state grant of $419,594 on the Mass Works program. But I listed on the back of this sheet all the different grants that we've received in the last 2 years. Now, what makes this different is that we receive a lot of grants every year. The CDBG grant, various police and fire grants that are normal grants. But these are sort of above and beyond what we normally get. And I just wanted to go through them. I think it's very important that the citizens recognize that this town council is doing everything, and this town manager is doing everything in his power to try to take some pressure off local taxpayers by really being aggressive in trying to find state funds for some of these projects. So I'm going to name the grants. 2017 Mass Works Infrastructure Grant, which again is moving a storm sewer drain out from underneath the United Lens building. The grant was from the Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development for $419,594. As many people in Southbridge are aware, we had an administrative consent order in terms of building a water line from the town of Southbridge to people in Charlton that had some water issues. The Department of Environmental Protection gave the town of Southbridge $5 million for that particular project. The Green Communities Grant is something that a lot of the members here were very interested in. Basically, this is a state program that is an ambitious renewable energy agenda to reduce energy consumption and emissions to complete renewable energy and energy efficient projects in their communities. It's by Department of Energy Resources. That grant was for $206,130. One of the projects that's currently being worked on is converting our old oil furnaces in Town Hall to gas furnaces, which are much more energy efficient, and again, over the long term, will save tax dollars here in this community. We've received 3 community compact grants. One, you remember, was for the facility management plan, to develop a plan for all town buildings to look at the long-term needs in terms of the capital buildings themselves. That was for $29,500. The second community grant is implementing best practices, which is essentially looking at the potential of combining our DPW staff with the school facilities management staff to find out if we can get efficiencies by doing that to save money and at the same time improve services. That's being given to us by the Executive Office of Administration and Finance. That's $35,000. The third community compact is one that I worked on with the school system. They were unaware of this grant, and I worked at the time with Dan Dede, who was here, and with their IT director. And it's a $45,000 grant, which was used for replacement and adequate district-wide internet, router, firewall, and security appliances. So IT needs at our school system, and their IT person worked really hard with me and applied for that grant and received $45,000. The electric vehicle incentive grant, we received $15,000, $7,500 towards the purchase of the electric car that the town is using, and $7,500 to purchase and install the electric vehicle charger that's on the side of the building. So that was another $15,000. So in the last 2 years, above and beyond our normal grants, the town received $5,750,224. Now, while it's true that state taxpayers pay for this, and some of our taxpayers pay for this, if we didn't spend the money here, it would go off to some other community. So it's a positive in terms of our local tax dollars and really helps in terms of our town budget. The last grant was something that is not from the state of Massachusetts. It's sort of a specialized grant. I particularly want to comment and thank Steve Rosenfeld for his work on this particular grant, because it is a unique grant. It's something he really reached out for. And it was called Writing for Focus. and it was to purchase, I believe, 25 bicycles, helmets, maintenance equipment, and repairs to bicycles, also training and curriculum for physical education program. This is something Steve's been working with the school system. It's a great program for their physical education department, and it's approximately worth $30,000. So the town has done very well by the state of Massachusetts. We really have enjoyed the partnership with our Commonwealth, and I think it's great, and I appreciate all the town employees that were involved in working for these grants. And that's all I have, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Agenda item number 7 is swearing in and presentations, and we do not have any this evening. I will note that next meeting we will have a presentation in regard to the new zoning update, bylaws update committee that's happening right now, and they will be here at the next meeting to let the community know how that is progressing and what to expect in the next year. Agenda item number 8, Citizens Forum. Is there anyone who would like to address the council on anything that is not on the agenda? Please state your name, your address, and you will get 5 minutes.
John Pulaski. I live at 3 Jennison Street. I came home more prepared than usual, but the town manager threw me off because you asked the question, said some things, I mean, in a good way. I came down here because at the last meeting, and I'd asked you folks consider, well, you're not going to take person's advice necessarily from here, but at one of the last meetings before the new council, I asked that you folks consider putting the Citizens Forum after the Councilors Forum so we could respond to comments made by the councilors. I'm still dumbfounded by why councilors ask questions at the end of a meeting, not all councilors, some councilors, they can't be answered because the citizens can't come back up. And sometimes these comments add to the false narrative in this town about the landfill. There's a lot of things that we hear. And because we only get 5 minutes to speak, and councilors can speak sometimes ad nauseum, usually a normal amount of time. Such things as, for example, where the contamination at the landfill comes from. According to federal law, it doesn't matter if it's our fault or the operator's fault. We're both responsible. In fact, companies that legally dump things up there, let's say a company legally dumped something up there that didn't belong up there afterwards, for example, let's say chromium, they could be responsible if it's an outrageous amount of money. But we hear, oh, we're going to pay, or Casella's going to pay, or they're going to sue us. These things aren't important. I'm getting off track a little bit. But a counselor had asked questions that you would think from the questions that the reason the landfill is not continuing is because of what happened at the ballot box in June. That was a nice vote. I was against it going on the ballot. Finally, it was revealed that it's not a minority of people in town that are opposed to the landfill. And Councilor O'Clair and Mr. Marchetti and others in town worked really hard. They were outspent 10-1, and they still did very well and had a really good showing. And I think we had a historical turnout in that particular election. But some of the questions that were asked is like, where's the trash going to go? We were promised, and this is something, I bring it up every couple of years over the last 10 years, we were promised, and it was reported in the Telegram, you can still look it up. First we were promised that they would never extend the landfill, and secondly that we'd get between $108 and $150 million for giving up our 60-year landfill. We had a 60-year landfill, and we were told it would last 20 years with what they're bringing in. It doesn't look like it's going to last 10 years. Now, I'm sorry, but because all this is all recorded, the town manager is asking about other sources of money. It seems to me we've been shortchanged somewhere between $50 and $100 million. And even like 3 years ago, when there was somebody was offering $27,000 to do a study on what the average amount towns are being paid, that whole thing was a silly exercise because we were promised Not that we're going to get some average, but that we were going to get, they used the term, I thought it was an unusual term for a town, most favored nation status, that we would get more than any town in the Commonwealth. And there are towns in this Commonwealth that are getting a lot more. And still, even today, we're getting only a small percentage. Small percentage is an exaggeration. We could possibly be getting twice as much for what's going in there right now because of tipping fees and what towns are getting in other parts of the Commonwealth. And I don't understand why lawyers aren't going after to get the money the town is owed. I mean, we're not talking 10,000 here. I've heard meetings, I've seen stuff where you guys vote 2 years after the fact to pay a $300 bill. How about us getting the tens of millions of dollars that are due the town of Southbridge? It's not like that money didn't have a price connected to it. And I don't mean what it's done to our real estate values. I mean what it's done to people's health. Some people in the past have said it doesn't have anything to do with our concurrently growing asthma rate in town. It just happens to increase at the same time as when the garbage started coming in. But that's a lot of money. Maybe we can hire Copeland and Page. They put that whole thing up.
Mr. Pulaski, do you need more time?
If I could, please. I'll try to close it up.
Second. All those in favor? Opposed? 7-1. Excuse me. 8-1.
There's got to be a way to get that money. I mean, it was promised. And, you know, town manager's doing a great job trying to get other money, grant monies. But this is just cold, hard cash that we were promised. And there's something else in the answer to the questions about the landfill closing and the like. If our Board of Health went by state law, there are many reasons that they can change the landfill site assignment. If any of the site assignment conditions are broken, they can change it. Right now, I believe it's 405,600 tons a year. They could, on Thursday night, say, look, there's a water contamination issue, this, and this site assignment condition is being broken. We're reducing it to 10,000 tons a year. And the answer to the question of what we can do with our trash is we can continue to use our landfill for the next 15 years. And instead of letting that other company pay us like a nickel on the, or I know it's more like 20 cents on the dollar for what they're getting for putting the trash up there, we will have a reliable place to put our trash. And then maybe we can negotiate with that company and say, hey, look, since you don't have to take the trash away, why don't you give us this land? They bought a lot of land up there. Maybe they can trade off us and give us a little land. And they can do their cleanup, leave us a little bit of a cell, and have a landfill. Sturbridge is doing great with their landfill. And there's an implication like people that are involved in the landfill, they don't have solutions. You know, we don't come up here and boast about what we're doing. I spend a lot of time on the phone with state legislators. That's why I don't spend as much time talking to you folks more. They seem to listen more, or not listen more, but do more with the information I've shared with them that I've learned over the last 10 years. And then you have like Kirsty Pesci, who's a leader not only in Massachusetts, but nationwide. She's consulted on zero waste issues. And Linda Kokalis, I don't know if you folks know, Sturbridge is the #1 recycler in the state of Massachusetts. It looks like my time is up. But let's go and go after that money. Wouldn't an extra $10, $20 million be nice? And that company, they got the money. They're doing very well. We're not doing as well.
All set, Mr. Pulaski?
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to address the council on something that is not on the agenda this evening? Anyone else? Okay, we're going to move on. Agenda item number 9, overview by the Board of Assessors on tax classification and tax rate. Will Canoia, Principal Assessor, will do the presentation.
Good evening, everyone. It'll take me a moment to get my laptop set up. In the meantime, one of our board members, Diane Kokoska, is going to pass around a copy of our presentation. So.
Do you have another grant sheet? Jim, while there was a sheet left, unless there's one on there.
Thank you. Got it? Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
great, no technical difficulties. So thank you very much. It's that time of the year again. It's that time of the year for the classification hearing and to take the votes to set the tax rate. Let's see. On behalf of the other members of the board, Fran Biscay and Diane Kokoska, we're going to be presenting some information on the various classification options and also the tax rate and the tax situation in general for the town. Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing. I hear like echoing coming from the back of the room. I'm having trouble hearing Mr. Kamara.
Okay. Excuse me, is it me? Am I not talking close enough?
No, I think it's people talking in the back. It's
Okay.
just echoing up
Council-
here.
Okay, if you could have just asked first. Okay, thank you. So if we could just be quiet in the back, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Canoia.
Okay, so state law requires every city and town to present their options for classification, which we're going to do. There are several. So classification, it does not change the total tax levy. It simply changes how it's allocated and who pays what share. It doesn't determine the tax rate for the town. That's basic math, which we'll get into in a few minutes. It doesn't determine how much money can be raised. The guidelines of Prop 2.5 do that. It doesn't determine how much money will be raised. We're going to get into that a little bit after, too. It's basically, it's math, what was voted on and what's coming in from other sources of revenue. These are the top areas of discussion that we're going to go through. I'll be talking a little bit about each one of them. So new growth, this is very important. Under Prop 2.5, you're allowed to increase your levy limit based on your new growth, the amount of property taxes you can raise every year. But another even more fundamental and key point of it is new growth is new houses, subdivisions, businesses, condo conversions, personal property, that's added business equipment. And the important thing about it is it allows the town to raise additional tax dollars, but not affecting the existing property owners from the year before. So we can raise additional revenue, but it's from new items and new taxpayers. It's also important to remember that those new taxpayers bring in new costs that we have to use, so they help pay for it. So in the current year, our new growth exceeded our 5-year average by a considerable amount. So as you see, the new growth in value totaled $20,802,000, and this allowed the town to raise an additional $427,000 in new taxes in new growth. As I say, it exceeded our estimates, our 5-year average and our estimates by a considerable amount. The main things that contributed to it is some of the solar fields that you all, I think we had a couple of pilot programs, pilot tax agreements. Those were a large portion of this, and other business equipment. As you can also see by this chart here, the residential class, the new growth was only 29.9%, which means the commercial, industrial, and the personal property class made the majority of it, almost 70%. Just a graphic depiction of it as well. So with the new growth and also with the changes in property values based on market conditions, the town value this year is $975,301,000. That's an increase of $42 million over last year and about 4.5%. Another graphic depiction of it, as you can see, the big section in green is the residential class, which makes up about 76.8%, I believe. Okay, this chart here, it just shows over the last 11 years the breakdown of the property classes in town. So in 2008, the residential class made up 83.6% of the property value in town. And as you can see, that's slowly decreased till a few years ago. It kind of flattened out at 76.4%. This year it went up to about 76.8%. But so what that means is the residential class picks up that percentage of the tax burden, and the commercial class picks up the remainder. So again, 11 years ago, the commercial class picked up 16.4%. This year, they're 23.2%. So it's important to note that. Revaluation recertification. So this has to do with, it's required by the state, but where do our property values come from? You see something there, recertification every 4 years. As many of you remember, it used to be mandated every 3 years. With the new, the Municipal Modernization Act, they've changed it. They go into a 5-year schedule, but in the interim, it's going to be 4 years for Southbridge, which will be in 2020. After that, it'll be 2025. So, but the revaluation, we're still required to do all of that work and update our values annually. It's just the state doesn't come in and do all of their all of the efforts that they do, inspecting our properties, going out and doing field reviews and so forth. We still have to do it every year, but they don't come in. They come in every 4 years now. Full and fair cash value as of January 1. We're required to assess all of the properties as of their full and fair cash value of the January 1 prior to the fiscal year. Excuse me, which we do. And to do that, we use all of the comparable sales from the year prior. So what does that all ensure? Your property is valued, everybody's property is valued at a full and fair cash value. If you think it's overvalued, you have the right to appeal it and contest it. But really what it guarantees is you own a portion of the town. So if you have a property worth $200,000 and the town is worth $1 million, you own 20% of it and you're paying 20% of the property taxes. Now, it's far more complicated than that, but that's basically the concept. And every year, based on the market, real estate market, these proportions and values can and will change. So how do we do that? People say, you know, you'd never go to my house. Well, the first one, cyclical inspection program. The state requires us to visit their property, every property in town, a minimum of once every 9 years. So there are 6,000 properties, plus or minus, in town. That means we go out to close to 600 properties a year and inspect them. We also, any property that sells, I inspect. All the building permits, we go out there to update your property on that and correct your value. During the revaluation year, we have to inspect from outside inspection 50% of them. We send out I&E questionnaires to all of the businesses to find out what the rents are and so forth, so to get the income approach to value. I inspect properties at taxpayer request, and anybody who files an abatement application, I go out. So we're pretty thorough on getting the data correct and trying to come up with the correct value. So what does all that mean for this year? In valuation changes, single-family properties have appreciated in value about 3.25%. As everybody's probably aware, the real estate market has gotten much healthier, and that's evident in Southbridge as well. So single-family properties appreciated about 3.5%. I'm sorry, 3.25%. Condos went up just a very little bit. 2- and 3-family properties. The state combines the class, so do we, about 5.49%, but the 3-family end of it is close to 10%. Apartments over 4 units, they've become very, very in demand. They've appreciated about 13%. Land hasn't really changed. So what all that means is the total residential class went up about 4.48%. And the total commercial class, it didn't really change much this year. And industrial went up about 1.25%. So the tax levy. People ask me, where does the tax levy come from? Well, basically, it's all of the expenditures by the town, and they're all, that means all voted appropriations and expenditures and state and county changes. So everything, all the budgets, everything we voted on, and the other charges. And that's paid for by using state aid, and reimbursements, local receipts, excise tax, the enterprise funds, free cash, stabilization, any transfers. The remainder is the tax levy. And for this year, the tax levy is $20,237,501. So we've talked about that. The tax levy is the $20,237,000. We've already talked about the total town value being $975,301,000. So you take the tax levy, you divide it by the total town value, that yields the tax rate. In this case, this year's tax rate is $20.75. So a comparison to last year, Last year's levy was $19,194,000, so it's an overall increase of $1,043,000 or 5.44%. As I said, our new growth is $427,000, so if you subtract that, the change after new growth is $615,000 or 3.21%. Prop 2.5, how does that factor in? It does a number of things. It requires a town to be underneath their levy ceiling. It gives you a levy limit and a maximum allowable levy. I'll get into all this in a moment. And it leaves you with an excess levy capacity, which you all will have to certify that you've been presented this to. I'll be passing something around later on for you to sign. But what those things mean is the levy ceiling, basically it's that Prop 2.5 says the tax levy can't be more than 2.5% of the total town value. So that means your tax rate can't be higher than $25. So for the town, the total value is $975 million. If you 25% of that would mean a tax levy under this cannot be higher than the $24,382,000 this year. There's another limit under Prop 2.5, which is actually much more strict, and that's called your levy limit or your maximum allowable levy. So what that basically says is you take the previous year's levy limit, you add 2.5%, you add your new growth, and that gives you your current year levy limit. To that, you can add any voter-approved debt exclusions or property overrides. So for our town, last year's levy was levy limit was $19,000,009. A 2.5% increase would be $497,000. The new growth that we talked about, oops, I have a typo in there, I apologize, $427,000. So our levy limit this year is $20,829,000. To that, you add the debt exclusion that the voters voted for Bay Path. So the total maximum allowable levy is $20,048,000. We could not go higher than that. So this chart right here shows for the last 6 years what the maximum allowable levy is, what our actual tax levy was, and what the excess levy capacity was. In this particular case, our excess levy capacity is $811,000, which means if the town had so chose, we could have raised taxes an additional $811,000. The town chose not to, but that capacity is there. So one of the options under classification is a residential exemption. So what that allows is up to a 20% discount, up to a 20% discount of owner-occupied residential properties. What that would mean, though, what that means, though, is the tax rate increases on the residential class to make up for the property amount exempted. So if we were to shift it 20%, right now, as I've already explained, the tax rate is $20.75. If we were to adopt the residential exemption, the tax rate on the residential class only would be $23.82. So it's a higher rate, but some people get some property value exempted off of that. So this shifts the burden from lower valued homes to vacant land, higher priced homes, and non-resident homes, apartments and so forth. All vacant land is taxed at the higher rate. This works in communities with a large amount of vacation homes or non-owner occupied properties like Boston or Somerville and Cambridge, all of the places where a lot of people come and rent apartments, a lot of college students. So basically there's usually about, let me see, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, there's about 12 or 13 communities that do this in the state. Every year or so, one comes off of it, maybe a new one will go on, but there's about 12 or 13 communities. And basically, they're the water, like I said, Barnstable, Boston, Brookline, Cambridge, Chelsea, Everett, Nantucket, Tisbury, Watertown. They're places that either have a lot of rental homes, apartments, or they have a lot of vacation homes that the burden gets shifted to. So again, this works in communities such as that. Based on the complexity of this, it can be perceived as very unfair. The Board of Assessors strongly recommends against adoption of this exemption. we can go into it further later on. I have more info, but that's a good overview. So the classification factor, this is the part where you can split the tax rate. So it requires the council, and you'll be voting on this, to adopt a factor between 1.0 and the minimum residential factor. So it allows a maximum shift of 50% to the CIP properties, commercial, industrial, personal property. Based on the breakdown of residential to commercial, the minimum residential factor is 0.849. In other words, the residential class, right now they're at 1%. They couldn't pay less than 0.894240. The council could, if they chose, to adopt a factor between 1.0 and that minimum residential factor. Again, a factor of 1.0 means each class of property would be taxed at the same rate. So examples of shifts of various classes. So I know that's very, very small. You all have in your packet this chart. At the back of your your packet, there's a full page size of this. I think it's the second to last page. And for those people who are watching it on television, I'm going to blow this up in a moment, a little bit bigger, break it out into a couple of sections. But so basically, along the top half, it says with a factor of 1.0, the tax rate would be $20.75 for residential, $20.75 for the CIP. If you go all the way to the left along the top, a tax rate using that minimum residential factor, the residential rate could go down to $17.62, but the commercial industrial personal property would have to go up to $31.13 to do that. So I'm going to go to the next slide, which is the bottom of that particular one. So basically what this all shows is the average single family, the average commercial, and the average industrial property, what this would do to them. So with a single tax rate, you can see the average residential property is going to pay this year $35.74. The average commercial is going to pay $11,147, and the average industrial is going to pay $11,339. If you were to split it to the maximum at that 50%, the average residential would drop to $3,035, a difference of about about $550 approximately. $540. Okay, but to save that $540, the average commercial would go from $11,100 to $16,007, which means what? Close to $5,600, and the average industrial would go from $11,003 to $17,011. Again, an increase of almost $7,000 approximately. So you could vote to shift it any part in the middle. Again, the Board of Assessors recommends to you a 1.0 single tax rate the way it is now. Statewide, I believe about a third of the communities shift their tax rates. In our area, Sturbridge did it one time. They have moved back to a single tax rate. Charlton has a single tax rate. Dudley has a single tax rate. Webster has a split rate. So this next slide, again, it's very small, I know that. It's at the end of the packet I passed out as well in a full-size version, bigger version. And I have this broken down over the next two slides as well. So under a single tax rate, this is what's going to happen to our property taxes in town. The average condominium is going to go up $53 this year over last year. The average single family is going to go up about $148, 4.34%. The average 2 and 3 family is going to go up about $188, or 6.4%. Vacant land is actually going to have a decrease in taxes this year because their property value stayed the same. The over 4-unit apartment units, these are going up quite dramatically. So their property taxes are going up about $1,066 to the average, or 18%. It's slightly deceptive here because we had one large property that came online that skewed the values up a little bit, the average value up a little bit. It's not quite this bad, but it's in the 12 to 13% on most properties. Commercial is going up about 1.1%, and the average industrial is going up about 6.6%. So classification factor. The Board of Assessors, as I said, recommends a factor of 1.0, single tax rate for all classes of property. And tax-wise, how do we compare? So these numbers are off the DOR website. I try to get them every year just so we have a very objective view of where we are compared to other communities statewide. So they only have last year's published, so that's why I have 17 here. But for 2017, Southbridge ranked 281 out of the 338 communities. So that put us in the lowest 16% statewide in regards to average single-family property tax. This year, at the tax rate of $20.75, the average single-family property tax bill will be $3,574, which I mentioned earlier. Oops, I think I skipped one, I'm sorry. Yeah, I did accidentally. So I'm just backing up a slide because I missed one, but the average single-family property tax bill statewide last year was $5,426. Last year, the average property tax bill in Southbridge was $3,426. It was exactly $2,000 less than the average. Okay. So this chart just graphically reflects Southbridge being the maroon on the bottom, state average being the green on the top, just how we've kind of tracked over the last 20 years or so, 23 years. Okay, so this chart here, how do we compare to our neighbors? And I have to be honest with you, I try to get the latest information. Some of this information I got from phone calls today because every city and town is trying to set their tax rates. And in fact, Sturbridge, I couldn't get the average single-family tax bill yet. So I put in red, that's last year's. So again, Southbridge, our average tax bill is $33,575. Sturbridge last year was $5,161, plus they have a 3% CPA Conservation Preservation Act surcharge that gets added to that. Charlton this year is going to be $3,700. Auburn, $4,638. Dudley, $2,865. Webster, $3,676. And the town of Ware, $3,707. Obviously, if you look in the middle column, our tax rate is high for all of those, but it's because our property values are a little bit lower. But in my view, the important thing is what am I paying the average single-family property? So every year I talk about the town has exemptions for some people, who qualify under the state law. So I won't get into every one because a lot of people do qualify. I will get down to the bottom three, though, that I think are really, really important. So a Clause 41A tax deferral, that's something we've only got, I think, 1 or 2 people who take advantage of. And really what that is somebody who, you have to qualify, you have to be at least, I believe, 60, it's either 60 or 65, it's escaping me right now. There's different requirements on all of these. But what that is, you can apply for any exemption you may qualify for, and that'll reduce your taxes by that. Then if you decide to, you can have all of your taxes, property taxes, deferred to a later point. So if you owe $3,000, you can defer all 3,000 of them till a point when you either sell your house, or you decide to, or you pass away, or you just decide to pay them off if that's the case. But usually it's when somebody sells their house. And it allows a senior to stay in their house and not pay any property tax out of their pocket until a time of their choosing, or they okay. So that's a very important one. The interest rate is 5%. The Senior Tax Abatement Program, that's a program that the town has offered for a number of years where seniors can volunteer, and we have a number of them who do, and you can earn a $600 credit off of your property tax. I have my number there, the assessor's office number. I urge any senior who has any questions, even thinks that they might want more information on this. I'm not going to get into the details of all of these because I'll bury you all and the eyes will be rolling. But seniors call me, and it happens all the time, and I'll discuss, or they can come in, we'll discuss it, and we'll find out if you qualify for anything. Incidentally, over the summer months, our Board of Assessors, we've talked about this, there are some, these are the ones that are offered under state law. There are some local options that we're going to probably bring forward which can make it help adjust for inflation over the last few years on the qualifications and also in the benefit as well. So over the next six months or so, we're probably going to bring some forward to you to see if we as a town want to adopt them locally to enhance them. And that's it from my end. If you have any questions, if I may before. So then there's 3 items that you have to vote on. Agenda items 10, 11, and 12. The board has a recommendation on all of these. We have a recommendation because that's how we feel, but in addition to that, one of them is like a negative, and you have to vote no to get it to do yes. So that's one of the reasons I have those recommendations on there. So after you vote on all of those, I have a form that has to be, I'm going to pass around. It has to be signed that you were advised of these options, and I have to send it and submit it to the state. So after you voted on them, I'm going to pass them on starting here. And if you could give them to Max at the other end, and I'll pick them up from him. Okay, that's our presentation.
Thank you. Any questions at this point? Councillor Steves.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation, Will. It was concise as usual. I have a few questions. First of all, one thing I noticed, obviously, is that everything's based on the average values. Do you have the median values of single-family homes in town?
No, I don't. And the reason I don't is this. The state compares and tabulates data on every city and town. And the median is a very, very important number, but I want to be able to compare apples to apples, not apples to oranges. So the numbers I showed you here for Southbridge and Webster and those, that's exactly what the state does. The median in our community, I don't think it would be very different, but in some communities they are. And I just don't want to do an apples to orange comparison.
Well, that's why I asked, because in some cases they are very different. That's why I was curious.
Yep, and that's the reason I do it that way. Along with every, if you tomorrow you look and say, I wonder if he was completely accurate. If you look up the state website, you'll find identical numbers to what I've talked about and all of that, because they compare it in the average, unless I made a mistake, of course.
No, I'm sure they do. That's not the point. I'm just curious because obviously you know what median is, and just for the people out there who don't, it means that half of the properties are below this value and half of the properties are above this value. Whereas the average, you can have one gigantic property that skews all of the values.
If I could comment on that, in the town of Southbridge, I have looked at that over the past. I just don't have this year's numbers. The average and the median won't be very far off at all. In some communities, one that I called today, it's a dramatic difference. The community I called has a lot of lakefront property, and they have quite a few million-dollar homes. And so their average is quite a bit higher than their median because of that. Town of Southbridge, we don't have any million-dollar homes. We have, we have small houses, lower value houses, going up into, probably some in the $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 range. But it's a much more centralized tendency to value, so I don't think that's the case. Okay.
Okay. Also, let's see here. I was jotting down questions, so bear with me while I scroll through them here. One thing I noticed, you were commenting on if you look at the taxable value chart here, and you kind of mentioned in passing, but I just wanted, hopefully you could clarify a little bit. Why is it that the residential property, after it's stabilized, is starting to rise as a percentage of our town's value? And the industrial CIP is not.
So there's a lot more shifting in value on the residential side for a number of reasons. The real estate market is getting very, very hot again. So that translates much more quickly to the residential side. So this year we've had a bump in the residential valuations. The commercial is more slow to get that because the commercial tends to be along the income approach. What will that property rent for? What are the expenses? What's the net operating income? How will I capitalize that income? So it's much slower. And this year, as I said, the residential part, we're hearing stories about houses selling for above offering price, above asking price again. We haven't really had that since 2006, 2005. So it's just, the residential side is a lot more dynamic, and that's what happened this year.
Okay. Also, to jump over to the section on residential exemptions, and you mentioned that if we were to do that, I think that was a 20% rate, it would be 2382.
Yep.
Okay. Where would the value split be where people were getting the benefit and versus we're paying more?
That's a great question.
And how many households would be affected?
Well, I have a slide I can bring up.
Okay.
You're going to have a real hard time seeing it because there's a ton of data there, but I can't remember it all without it, so bear with me just a minute.
Yeah, I can't see that.
So I know you can't see this because I'm looking at my computer and I'm really having a hard time staring at it. But so you see a yellow line across. So that is the average single-family property value that we talked about. And if it's owner-occupied, that property would pay, with a single tax rate, excuse me, that property will pay $3,574.
Right.
If we were, oops, excuse me a minute, I had the wrong one. Okay, I'm going to start over again. With a single tax rate, that property would pay $3,574, like we've talked about earlier. So if that average property, if we had the residential, come on, excuse me a second, I'm really having a hard time getting this slide up. Okay, here it is. So if we had the residential exemption at 20%, that property the average single-family property would have a savings of $165, okay? However, that average single-family property, if it wasn't owner-occupied, it would have a tax increase of $528, okay? Non-owner occupied. Then you see a maroon line a little further down. That is the point, the break-even point. So a house that was valued at $226,000 currently with a single tax rate would pay $4,689. If we had the 20% residential exemption, at that point, that $226,000 valued house would have no savings. But if that house was not owner-occupied, it would pay $693 more, okay? We'll get to that part in a second. So any house that's valued higher than that, so let's see, two down is a house valued at $240,000. That's not astronomically high. Even if you live there with the residential exemption, you would pay more. With the residential exemption, you'd pay about $42 more if we adopted it because you're over that break-even point. So there's a lot more to it, though. So with the residential exemption, land would not get a residential exemption because obviously it's not owner-occupied. So people who have large pieces of land, their property taxes would go up rather significantly because you can't live there and so forth. So that would put pressure on land for development. Two-family houses, probably about 50% of them are owner-occupied as an estimate. So the 50% that aren't would pay more in property taxes. Three-family would pay more in property taxes. Multifamilies would pay quite a bit more in property taxes. Now you say they're not owner-occupied, and that's all true, but they're occupied by renters and citizens who are renting these apartments. So anyway, you can't see this. I can if I really squint. I made it so I know what it says, but that's a quick summary.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
Oh yeah, you did mention
You did
mention the idea earlier about that there are a few programs that you know of that the state has that we have yet to adopt.
Yep.
And you mentioned that you might bring them forward within the next 6 months. Would you be able to send those to us? Because I was going to ask you that anyway. So.
I'd much prefer to it's not sent to you, I'd much prefer present it to you with the Board of Assessors over the next 6 months.
Okay.
As you all know, there's a ton of laws that the state adopts and they give it as a local option.
Yes.
So, there are just dozens of various options, and so we need to analyze them and then present with our recommendations, I believe.
Okay, and last, do we actually send out a note to people about these options? I mean, I know like Maureen and I aren't eligible for most of them, but do you send them, so we don't see them in the tax bills, do you send them to the seniors who might be eligible?
No, we reach out.
That might make sense if we can.
We don't send them out, but we reach out every opportunity. I know Mike Trombley down the senior center sends people up all the time, with questions, or either veterans or seniors as well. We have people all the time who come in with a question. We have a brochure that we give out. We have that same brochure on the website, which gives a general overview of everything. So no, we don't mail stuff out to them, but it's, we get the word out as best we possibly can.
Okay, would it be legal to include just a quick list of what's available in the tax bills? I know that there's some limits on what you can put in those. But.
Well, the tax bills are a folding form.
Yeah,
there's not a lot of room. I think they have the ability to put a short message, but a 1 or 2 sentence message, I believe. But so I'm not really sure. I could talk to the tax collector about that. But please call if you have questions about exemptions. But we much prefer getting the word out by methods like this.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Yep.
Anybody else? Councilor Clare.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Will. Can you explain to me a little bit more about the residential exemption? So I was under the impression that the residential exemption was in effect pretty much just a discount on the assessed value of the home. Yeah,
that's exactly what happened. So let me go to another one of my miniature slides.
Yeah, I'm having trouble following your math where a $240,000 home wouldn't see any kind of decrease with a residential exemption versus, so can you explain how you got to those numbers?
I could. So what this one says is the total residential value in town is $749 million. If you divide that by the number of parcels, that gives an average residential value of $145,000. So if we were to do a 20% exemption, you would exempt off $14,500, about $29,000 in value. However, the residential class still has to make up the same amount of the tax levy. That's why the tax rate would jump up by the number I said. I don't have it on this one, but so the tax rate is higher, but you're getting about a $29,000 exemption to your value. So if you have a lower valued house, that drop in value more than makes up for the increase in the tax rate. But at the certain point that I showed you on the chart, the drop in value of the $29,000 doesn't make up for that, and the higher tax rate just increases the tax.
Okay, so it's not done by the individual parcel. So if my say my home is worth $200,000 to keep it even numbers. So say it's $200,000 and we were to do a 10% residential exemption. Does that assessed value not now go down to $180,000 for the 20.75 or whatever the tax rate would ultimately be with the exemption? So wouldn't it be on a parcel by parcel basis? And I guess I'm still not understanding where that ceiling is at for who would benefit from this.
No, you are correct. You are correct. It is off of your value. So the high. I'm going to have to plead ignorance on that because when I did the calculations, I got the number off of a state formula.
Okay.
Yeah, off of a state formula, and I didn't. All of this comes from a state worksheet formula, and I didn't pay enough attention to the mechanics of the calculation. I'll be honest with you.
Okay.
Okay.
So, I mean, I've been thinking and talking to people about the residential exemption and what it could mean for our residents, specifically because over the next 2 years we're making up some, unforeseen costs with loss of landfill revenue and also the charter school that's going into Southbridge next year to, have an exemption that you would ultimately come off of to ease the burden of those who don't have means to make up that tax difference type of thing. Do you have a way where you could estimate if we were to do a, you know, it doesn't not a 20% exemption, but you know, like a 5 or a 10%
Yeah,
exemption?
I have a 10% calculation here as well. So, give me a moment. Here's the 10%. So the average single-family property at $172,000 value would save $76. The break-even point is at the $226,000. So they'd save $76, the average single family. If you had a lower price value, you'd save a little bit more than that. I can tell you, I don't have an exorbitant home. I'd be paying more with the residential exemption.
You keep saying, I'm not following how you would pay more with a residential exemption, even if your home value is high. It should be relative to.
No, I'd get a discount on the value, but that discount is a much smaller percentage of my total property value times the higher tax rate. I would pay more. I'm using me as an example because those of you who know me, I don't have an exorbitant house. I have a nice house, but probably similar
if your home's worth, I mean, I'll get out a calculator.
If your home is worth $226,000,
isn't that because somebody has to absorb it?
Yeah, exactly.
Somebody has to absorb.
Right, the other classes of property would. So your two families, your multifamilies, your vacant land, your commercial and your industrial. I believe that he's mistaken when you're saying that a higher home would have a higher valued owner-occupied single value home wouldn't have a higher tax rate.
They would, but this is part, I want to clarify. So you just mentioned it would be picked up by the commercial industrial. It would not. It would not. What happens is the residential class has to make up the same full amount of property tax. So if you're exempting off of me, somebody here has to pick up the portion that I'm not paying. And it's as simple as that.
When we talked about this last year, I thought that all classes would make up for it. You're saying that only the other residential uses would?
Only the residential class, exactly.
Okay, so okay. All right, I guess that's all I have for right now. Thank you.
Yeah, let me just clarify. So with the classification, if you're splitting the tax rate, you can take from the residential and put it to the commercial, industrial, personal property classes. But the residential exemption is all within the residential class.
Okay. I'm sorry, you said that you had a 10%, you had the numbers for 10%. Can you just pull those up?
That's them, but I know you can't see them.
Can you read them to me because I can't see it?
Sure, so across the yellow is the average single-family property value, which we talked about, and that single-family owner-occupied would save $76.77, but that same single-family property, if it wasn't owner-occupied, would increase by $246 or $248, I can't quite tell, because of the higher tax rate.
Okay.
Okay? Again, this is one where there are 12 or 13 communities statewide who do it. And there is nobody like us who does it, because all you're doing is shuffling cards, and somebody's going to pay this. The communities, if you want me to rename them, I can, and it's obvious why they do it. Boston, everybody comes in and rents apartments, and so the people, so it works. It shifts it to out-of-state people. Not Martha's Vineyard, I think Tisdale, Nantucket, they're all rental homes. They're million dollar vacation homes, so they're shifting the tax to them. Okay, that's it.
Yep. Anybody, you all set, Councilor Clare? Or?
Yeah, I am. Thank you.
No. Councilor Steves?
One thing you didn't mention is the small business exemption, which I know works more or less the same way, only within the CIP class.
Yep.
What would the numbers be for those if we were to do something at say 10%?
The numbers I'm not sure, because this one is even less of a percentage of communities who do this. I believe there are 5 in the state who give the small commercial exemption.
I know Auburn is one of them.
One of them is Auburn.
And they don't like it that much.
Auburn is one, I don't know the other four. So this basically shifts the tax rate up to 10% between properties occupied by qualified small businesses onto the other commercial and industrial property. The exemption goes to the property owner, not the business. So the business qualifies. If the business happens to be the same as the owner, they could get the benefit. But the owner of the property gets the benefit. Industrial properties don't qualify, but they share the tax burden for the exemption. So basically what happens is, if you do it, the commercial industrial have to pay still the same amount of total percentage in dollars, so their tax rate would go higher, but only the commercial ones can qualify. The industrial doesn't qualify. The value must be less than $1 million. They must have less than 10 employees. Again, there's approximately 5 statewide who use this. If you were going to be doing this, I would say we have to look at it for next year, because it would be impossible to get the tax bills out to do this. These are those, what did we call them a little while ago? Local option kind of things. Right. The state gives something, but there's a big price to this. All it does is shift it around a little bit, and everybody gets confused. I'm not sure who really makes out on these, but only 5 communities do it. That's all I can tell you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Councilor Nash.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. Just a quick note, actually, Mr. Conoyer. I just ask you to please check slide 22 before you post it to the website so that all figures are accurate.
22?
Just check your number on fiscal year 2018 new growth. So I think it's just a typo.
Oh, right, yeah.
Should read 427,914.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I'm sorry for pointing it out. I was afraid I'd forget.
Actually, I pointed out myself. I said, I made a typo. My bad. But thank you. I will fix that before I post it, though.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else?
May I just follow up, Mr. Conoyer or Mr. Town Manager? This will be on the website soon?
Yes, it will.
Okay.
It will.
Thank you.
If I could just make a quick comment. Somebody asked if I could post it before I gave it, and it wasn't done. I was working on it today, in fact, and I showed you Southbridge. I still didn't even get their information because they, so, okay. But it'll be posted within a day or two.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. Thank you, Mr.
Very
Conoyer.
welcome.
All right. Moving on to the agenda. Agenda item number 10, vote to establish a tax classification factor of 1.0 for tax purposes. The Board of Assessors recommends a yes vote for a single tax rate.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor? Motion carries. It seems. Question. Agenda number 11, vote to adopt varied classifications of property for tax purposes, including open space, discount, and residential exemption. The Board of Assessors recommends a no vote on this.
So moved.
Second.
I just want to make sure that we're really clear here. So we're voting, so we're recommending a no vote for this. All right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right? Let's make sure that when we vote, we understand. So all those in favor of a no vote?
No.
What?
To all those in favor, you voted the same way.
Right.
You just voted down.
Right.
Because you're passing it,
Sorry, my brain is not
you're
working.
recommending it, because the motion is positive.
I appreciate
So you're voting
that.
it down.
Right. All those in favor? Okay. All those opposed? Thanks, Counselor. My brain wasn't working for a moment. Okay, agenda item number 12, vote to adopt a single tax rate for all classes of property. The Board of Assessors recommends a yes vote.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions on the single rate? All those in favor? Motion carries. It's unanimous. Agenda item number 13, vote to appropriate $100,000 from overlay surplus to reduce the FY 2018 tax levy.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Questions or discussion? Councilor?
I was hoping that Mr. Knoyer would actually explain why we're doing this.
Explain why we're doing this?
Yeah.
So,
where this is coming from.
So every year, town of Southbridge, all communities, we have to, assessors have to collect what's called, not assessors, in the budget, there's a line for allowance for abatement, overlay is the term. So for Southbridge, the average amount that we collect is about $200,000. Previous, about 10 years ago, was $235,000. So basically what that amount of money does is this. That's the anticipation for all abatements and all of the exemptions we talked about. That's what pays for all of those. Each year as you settle out of that, you have taxes and it has to cover outstanding personal property taxes and any outstanding appellate tax board cases. In this particular year, we had 2 cases at the appellate tax board for Verizon for some business equipment. They were very large cases, $5 million. Each one was in each year, because we had 2010 and 2011. Each year was approximately $100,000 in jeopardy if we were to lose that case. And it was a class action case against all the cities and towns in the state. So anyway, we settled with them for a very small amount, like maybe $5,000, as opposed to the $100,000 that they were looking for. And again, it was a settlement recommended by the Department of Revenue, so we settled. When we did that, it freed up money that was held in reserve against those appellate tax board cases. So the assessors voted to release that overlay reserve to overlay surplus, which is the general fund. Mm-hmm. You now have the ability to vote that money to apply it to this to reduce the tax rate. I can tell you it's something that has been done for many, many years, because each year some of this money that is held against outstanding taxes and so forth no longer becomes necessary. We vote to release it, you vote to do whatever with it, but at least over the last 10 years, you voted every year to apply part of it to reduce the tax rate. Okay. Last year, the number was $50,000, but the number varies each year. I've looked back over the last 10 years. Some years it was 50, one year it was 70, I think one year it was higher, but I can't recall the amount. In addition, at the time the budget was put together back in May, this is in the budget document that it was going to be anticipated for this purpose. I forget what it called. Other sources, I think what it was called in that budget document, but it's, you can't, but that was what the intent, it was there. Mm. Okay.
And how much is currently in that account?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. But again, every year, the accountant and I look at it, and it has liabilities attached to it. I'm not sure the exact amount. It's been several months since I looked at it. It's really as of June 30th. That is the key point. Mm-hmm. But you can anticipate another release next year.
Mm-hmm. And I assume that you purposely keep some money in there long term, just in case.
No, we keep money specifically against liabilities that we have, not just in case.
Yeah, well, just in case of liabilities, yeah. But.
Yeah. Yeah, just in case. This year was a little bit of an unusual year. I mentioned the Municipal Modernization Act earlier. Right. One of the changes in that was, it used to be you'd have an amount of surplus for each fiscal year. The state now allowed you to pool that money together so that it was much more flexible and not as much required. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay, and how much would this affect the tax levy?
$100,000, I'm not exactly sure. I can tell you in a minute, I just don't remember the number off the top of my head. If you want me to, I will.
Well, he can
Yeah.
come back to
Total
that.
levy
He
is
can
what,
get
20
us.
million?
You can get us that information after. I think
Okay.
he's fine with that.
Okay.
I mean, there's not much. It's what's being proposed.
Well, not 2%.
All right. Are you all set, Councilor?
I think so.
Okay. Anyone else with questions on this? Okay. All those in favor?
Have we had a motion?
Yep, sorry. Yeah, we've,
Yeah.
yes, that's,
Okay. Just wanted to clarify.
it's okay. Yeah, we're both, all those in favor. All right, motion carries. It's unanimous. Thank you. Agenda item number 14, vote to appoint Caitlin Spencer as the Inspector of Animals for year ending April 30th, 2018, in accordance with the provisions of Section 15 of Chapter 129 of the General Laws.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, we're going to have some discussion on this. Councillor Steve?
Just a quick question through you to the town manager. I recall specifically adding her as Inspector of Animals when we appointed her Animal Control Officer a couple of meetings ago. I was just curious why we're doing this again.
Thank you, Councilor. I appreciate it. I'm going to refer this to the police chief who's here to answer that particular question.
All right, good evening, Madam Chair, members of the council, Mr. Town Manager. Just, Councilor Steves, this is supposed to be done every March and no later than April per the state law that's cited on the agenda. The issue was Ms. Spencer wasn't working for us then. Yeah. She didn't get hired until October 16th of 2017. So that's why we're here tonight. You will see me again in March of 2018, just to stay in line with the Mass General Law.
My point is, though, is that I had added her specifically as animal inspector to the motion we made last time when we appointed our animal control officer. I moved to add it to that motion, and we approved it all. So I just don't know why we're doing it again.
Well, I do recall that, and unfortunately, in speaking with the town manager in Oxford and his animal control officer, they recommended that I come again as a separate agenda item and then forward her information to the state.
Okay.
I realize what you did. I vividly recall it, but okay. Here we are again tonight.
Whatever. It's better to be safe than sorry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chief. We discussed that earlier, and I had a feeling we had to just take a separate vote on it, but
correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for the Chief or anyone? Seeing none, all those in favor? Unanimous, motion carries. Okay. Agenda item number 15, vote to ratify the snowplow operations agreements for winter 2017-2018 per DPW summary dated November 21st, 2017.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion on this, or Councillor DePietro, do you have anything else to add in regard to this agenda item?
Madam Chair, if it's not apparent to everyone, didn't have a chance to peruse this or attend the subcommittee meeting, essentially, this is just adding several more contractors with equipment and Heather's ongoing battle against the storm, which I hope is not going to be coming very soon, and we don't have much of a winter. But again, her report to us was she does have a shortfall, and certainly these folks would be welcome in her ongoing fight with snow.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. All those in favor? Motion carries. It's unanimous. Agenda item number 16, vote to approve the hiring of Joshua Ardujar and Raymond Coet as temporary plow drivers as per DPW plowing and snow removal bids for winter 2017-2018.
So moved.
Second. Just want to correct the spelling.
It's
Andujar.
Yeah, that's why it was.
Yeah.
It didn't look right.
Yeah. Just
Okay. Did you get that on the correction? Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Any questions on this? Okay. All those in favor? Okay, thank you. Again, if anyone else is interested, we are still looking. Motion carries, unanimous. Agenda item number 17, vote to ratify amendment number 7 to the contract with Veolia Water North America for operations maintenance of the town's wastewater infrastructure with a contract fee increase of $1,913.57 per month in exchange for the operation and maintenance of 2 new wastewater pumping stations.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, Councillor
Just
Steves.
a quick clarification. Shouldn't it be for operation and maintenance of? Is there something separate for operation maintenance? Just the way the motion is written, it should be operation and maintenance. You do say that. You do say that the second time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Friendly amendment there.
Yeah.
The and is missing. It's on the original memorandum as and.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor
Pass.
Mackenzie.
It's Mackenzie.
Sorry, it just slipped a tongue. Sorry.
Right, we forget quickly.
It's been a long week. Okay. So again, that's for operations and maintenance. Any other questions, any other concerns? Seeing none. All those, you know, it's an amendment to the contract. Let's do a roll call on that, please. Next.
This is number 17. Councilor Carrasco? Yes. Councilor Clements?
Yes.
Councilor DePietro?
Yes.
Councilor McKenzie?
Yes.
Councilor Manna?
Yes.
Councilor Morales?
Yes.
Councilor Nash?
Yes.
Councilor Steves?
Yes.
Councilor Eau Claire?
Yes.
9 yes.
Motion carries. Thank you. Agenda item number 18, vote to adopt the zoning map amendment, changing the zoning designation on approximately .98 acres, more or less, herein identified on the Southbridge Assessors Map 48, Lot 134, from its present zoning designation of two-family residential to general business, as recommended by the Southbridge Planning Board at its public hearing held November 15th, 2017.
Second.
And I do have a letter from Kenneth Comia, who is our town planner, and I'll just note it for the record. Dear Chairwoman Clements, in accordance with the provisions of Mass General Law, Chapter 40A, Section 5, the Southbridge Planning Board held a public hearing scheduled at 7:30 p.m. and opened at 7:43 p.m. on Wednesday, November 15th, 2017, in GR Hall in the Southbridge Town Hall. Notice of public hearing was advertised in compliance with state statutes. The purpose of the public hearing was to receive public comment and consider amendments to the Southbridge zoning map as follows: changing the zoning designation on approximately .98 acres, more or less, herein identified on the Southbridge Assessors Map 48, Lot 134, from its present zoning designation of two-family residential to general business. The public hearing is closed on November 15th, 2017, after Planning Board members carefully considered the proposed zoning map changes as requested by the property owner, Dr. Thomas, T.K. Thomas, as most of us know him. A majority of the members, in a vote 4-2, recommended approval of the zoning change to expand the general business zoning district. This was sent, again, as I said, it regards Kenneth Comia, town planner. And we have the rest of the documentation on that. Any questions? Any?
No, just one quick comment for the public's sake, that we're talking here about the property that's known as 495 Main Street, that's been vacant for years, and the owners, I guess, has been trying to sell it for years, and nobody wants it because of the way it's zoned. So they're trying to change the zoning in the hopes that they will be able to sell it as a general business property rather than two-family.
Corner of Marcy and Main.
Yeah, it's the corner of Marcy and
With
Main.
the big tree.
Yep.
Okay, anybody else? All right, all those in favor? Okay, it's unanimous by all present. Motion carries. So now this will, I imagine, go back to the planning board, and they will proceed with whatever they need to do with this. Mr. Manager?
I'm sorry.
This will go back, and you'll make sure that
Yes,
this
correct.
gets, because we've had some issues in the past with back and forth at the planning board. Okay. Agenda item number 19, vote to approve the PARC grant for the purchase and developing for recreation purposes a certain property known as Lot 2A as follows. Ordered that $335,674 is appropriated to purchase and develop for recreation purposes by a negotiated purchase or otherwise. Oh, sorry.
I apologize, Chairman Clements. This actually is not going back to the planning board. This is the first reading.
Okay.
So it'll come to the board 2 more times.
Okay.
And then we'll vote to ratify sometime in January.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that whatever we needed to do, the manager was going to make sure that the process.
Okay,
So
very
2 more readings is fine with
We
us.
have to read it here twice, 2 more times.
Excuse me?
So we have to read it here 2 more times.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Okay.
No problem. I just wanted to make sure that whatever we needed to do, it went back and forth.
All right, very good. Thank you.
All right, thank you for pointing that
We'll
out.
see that it's
And
added
thank
to
you for
the
Uh,
being
agenda
here.
for next time.
I don't think we've ever done 3 readings of zoning changes.
It's a bylaw, it's a bylaw zoning.
It's a zoning change.
I've ever done
Yeah.
zoning changes 3 readings.
I'm going to do whatever we're told we're supposed to do.
There you go.
Okay, shall we continue now?
Yeah.
All right, so we're on agenda 19, and I just started with the order that $335,674 is appropriated to purchase and develop for recreation purposes by negotiated purchase or otherwise a certain property known as Lot 2A, consisting of 1.3 acres, more or less, as shown on plan entitled, quote, Plan of Land in Southbridge, Mass. Made by Sherman Friedrich, LLC, dated 7/10/2017, that said land be conveyed to Southbridge under the provisions Mass General Law, Chapter 45, Section 3, and as it may hereafter be amended in other Massachusetts statutes relating to the relating to recreation to be managed and controlled by the Department of Public Works of Southbridge, and the town manager be authorized to file on behalf of Southbridge any and all applications deemed necessary for grants and/or reimbursements from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts deemed necessary under the Urban Self-Help Act 301 CMR 5.00 and/or any others in any way connected with the scope of this article, and the town of Southbridge and the town manager's office be authorized to enter into all agreements and execute any constructing a riverside park, that to meet this appropriation, the treasurer, with approval of the town manager, is authorized to borrow $335,674 under Chapter 44, Section 7 and/or 8C of the general laws, or pursuant to any other enabling authority, and to issue bonds or notes therefore. Any premium received by the town upon the sale of any bonds or notes approved by this vote, less any such premium applied to the payment of the costs of issuance of such bonds or notes, may be applied to the payment of costs approved by this vote in accordance with Chapter 44, Section 20 of a like amount. This does not take effect unless the grant is approved by the state of Massachusetts. This requires a 2/3 roll call vote, and I note that this agenda item was not recommended by the General Government Subcommittee on November 28th, 2017.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, we'll open up for discussion. I'm going to move over for Councilor Mann and then Councilor Stevenson. We'll get the town manager.
Thank you, Madam Chair, to you. Looking at this, I still have the same concerns. And also, when you open the packet in the back on page 2 of the contract, it still shows checked off that our municipality is an urban population center that has 35,000 or more residents, and that's not the case. So I believe we are 35,000 or less. So that's huge.
Councilor Steves, I forgot General Government did this. If you
yes,
could read
that was the big issue for our November 28th General Government meeting. So bear with me because this will take a moment. Mr. Sanangelo said that he didn't think this proposal would come to council for quite some time, since he's still waiting to hear from the state about grant approval. Originally, he thought it'd be late November, but more recently heard to expect it in late December. Melissa Cryan from, is it DHCD that she's from?
I'm not sure what the
I'm
not sure the exact name of the agency.
Okay. Sent notice that the state wants us to approve appropriating the whole cost of this project, which is what we just heard, before the state will okay the grant, which is for reimbursement. He noted a couple of items have been rejected, which is a crosswalk of $50,000, a police detail of $2,500, and said he'd sent Ms. Cryan the documentation of the June 2016 vote setting aside $100,000 for the Waterside Park, which was attached to the grant application, and we have it here in our packet too. Councillor Clements agreed with that vote, but noted that it was a commitment to wanting to pursue some type of waterside area for the community, but not necessarily this particular one.
Excuse me. I'm not hearing you.
Okay. Is this better?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see, where was I? I just lost track, sorry. Okay, Councillor Clements said she's concerned about pursuing such a grant based on buying land before any proposal to actually do that has come to the council, and Councillor Nash pointed to lines in the application stating that we already own it. Mr. Sanangelo said Ms. Cryan is aware that the land purchase for $1 with a deed condition that it can only be used for a park is contingent on getting the grant, but provided no documentation of that, and noted there has been no previous council position on buying this land. Councillor Nash said he's uncomfortable with pursuing this without ensuring the land isn't contaminated. I agreed, saying that the land was once used for industry for 100+ years, had another site on the property, which is Rouge Brook, in the AO complex was contaminated. Several trees are dying, which suggests to me that this lot could be. And the riverbed mud is likely to be contaminated. While Mr. Sanangelo said he hadn't had environmental testing done and doesn't plan to because there's no reason to break that ground, I'm concerned about kids playing in the land or the waterfront. Councillor Manna cited concerns about several items in the application: the Riverside versus Waterside Park designation, the fact that another park will require ongoing maintenance and police patrols when we rejected a similar grant for a splash park for those reasons. She said parks are great, but an expense to taxpayers when we need to get more business for tax revenue, so she won't support this now. Mr. Sanangelo noted the idea is in the master plan, which Councillor Manna responded that that's a wish list of recommendations, but we can't afford it now. Mr. Sanangelo said he talked to the DPW director, to whom he attributed the application's cost estimates. He later told me that they had actually come from a consultant. He said that she told him most of the cost would be in building it without much necessary for maintenance. He urged putting more money into DPW for park maintenance overall, noting, quote, "This town has done a crumbing job of maintaining our parks," which unfortunately is true. Councilor Manna reiterated concern about putting another burden on our police with the likelihood they'd find vandalism, trash, and other issues here. Ms. Ryan, that is Jackie Ryan, General Government Subcommittee member, observed this kind of grant is similar to those the governor has blocked in the past, and felt that she could not justify committing so much money to this that could be going to the schools. Mr. Sanangelo responded by saying that we won't spend any of it if you don't get the grant, but he's heard at a recent MMA conference that state revenues are above expectations. I noted those revenue numbers seem to change rapidly and can't be relied on. Councilor Clements agreed, noting the governor can line item veto whatever he wants, and did so to a grant intended for the airport that had already gotten legislative approval. Last she saw, state revenues were way below expectations, and I'll admit, I looked it up at the time, and Mass DOR's website press release of November 3rd declared that they're $178 million above year-to-year benchmark. Afterward, I had heard that we were still dealing with a $500 million deficit from last year. So I don't know exactly where the numbers stand. Mr. Sanangelo noted the state doesn't generally rescind grants once they've committed to funding them. Councilor Manna asked about the grant for the electric car, which is kind of off topic, where the council voted to buy the car if we got a grant, but the car was bought anyway, and we actually had mentioned that earlier today. Mr. Sanangelo said that we got some from DEP, but the rest never came from the USDA. Mr. Marchetti, that's Mike Marchetti, said he recalled seeing a river park in the urban renewal plan, but not here, and sees a chance to widen the sidewalk along the fence. I agree that there was one in that plan proposed for near Hook Street. Councilor DePietro said the Recreation Department is starved now, and that makes it hard to support this. To him, this project is solving somebody else's problem and making it look better. He said he knew a contractor who had priced removing and replacing the fence on the property at $325,000, but don't we have something better to throw $100,000 at? Not to get river access, Mr. Sanangelo said. He sees it as improving life for town citizens with its value outweighing the costs, adding this wasn't a problem when we voted the $100,000, but now it is. He repeated the issue of abominable park maintenance, but noted that this one would be less costly than Henry Street, and the grant gets rid of the collapsing fence. Several councilors said that they're concerned that the fence might have to be replaced because of the slope's steepness, but such cost is not included in the grant. Councilor Clements, myself, and Councilor Nash noted that they'd walked the property the day before, taking several pictures. The roadside section includes a few sewer manholes, at least one that might be disintegrating, a few runoff outlets that need to be considered. Councilor Clements said that she sees a need for a riverside park, but we never saw the details of this grant or previous one before they were submitted, when we could have debated it and corrected some of these issues. I'm pretty disgusted with the piece of property we're getting, she added, noting she sees risks there from flooding, runoff, sewer manholes, sidewalk maintenance, and other issues. We could declare the fence blight and order Mr. Norton to remove it, and would rather see the $100,000 go to roads now, she said, asking, what if we start the project and can't finish it with the grant money? She said she feels it's not the best use of the money because there are too many uncertainties. Later, she noted Mr. Norton could have done the work himself if it mattered to him, but he wants us to do it, and it would become a liability for us forever. I asked if Mr. Sanangelo had looked into using the grant to improve river access behind West Street, where the rail trail runs along the river already, but he said he didn't know it existed. Mr. Smick asked what the town's actual share is, and I said that it was $116,452, which is in the document, which prompted Councilor Clements to note that Mr. Sanangelo had never come to us asking to increase that amount that we've set aside. Mr. Smick described this as a good idea but bad timing, predicting significant fiscal issues in the next 2 years, especially related to the schools that could require cuts and or tax hikes. He noted that when he was a councilor, they saw similar issues, and the first department cut was recreation. Mr. Sanangelo said that he feels that this project is important for the economic development and thinks the DPW can do the work to build it. It's worth the investment, he said, claiming that most people he's talked to think it's a good idea. Councilor DePietro said that it is, but most people don't see the budget issues that we do. He foresees this won't pass the full council and doesn't want to see a fist fight up here. If it doesn't, he asked Mr. Sanangelo to let it go, and he said he would. I want to like this, I really do, but can't with the upcoming fiscal issue, said Ms. Ryan. Councilor Nash agreed, seeing the idea as good, but he doesn't like the idea that the deal's not complete yet. He said that he didn't know how he'll vote on the council floor. Councilor Manna objected to the fact that we're applying for funds under part of the grant that said it's for a city of any size or a town of 35,000 or more residents, which you mentioned a minute ago, on the grounds that we don't meet the letter, and doesn't like the fact that we only have Ms. Cryan's words that the state would accept it. I noted, however, that we're legally a city, so I see that kind of a gray area. I also raised concerns about other issues in the application, namely lack of documentation to support the claim that it's not a brownfield, as in contaminated, which I mentioned earlier, a historical site, or might have endangered species, no letters confirming the claim that it won't need permits from the Army Corps of Engineers or Mass Environmental Protection Agency, and no appraisal data. Councilor Nash said that he doesn't like public perception that we're appropriating the $335,000 under these circumstances, even with the line that it won't take effect without the grant. He made a motion to recommend approval of appropriating the money, blah, 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 which is the text that she had read as our motion. Councilor Manna seconded, and we unanimously rejected it.
All set?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Town Manager.
Thank you, and I want to thank Councilor Steves for his report. There were absolutely a lot of questions raised at the General Government Committee, and I'm going to do my best to address those. I did attempt at the General Government Committee to address a lot of them and thought I did pretty well, but I wanted to really make sure that I address all your issues. First of all, I want to say clearly, we applied for this grant, and the reason I applied for this grant, and it's a grant essentially of $674 to build a park, a riverside park, right where, I mean, most citizens know is right in front of the Rotary, right on the right side of the Hotel and Convention Center. And the reason that I moved forward this project, and frankly from the very beginning coming here, one of the key issues was implementing the town Southbridge master plan. We all remember this. This was put forward September 2013. And, you know, one of the things that I decided to do is to work on trying to implement that with my department head team to see how we can move forward with that plan. Obviously, the town invested in a tremendous amount of money to do the plan, and it set goals and objectives for the town to try to meet. I'll note that there were 16 top recommendations, and I want to read number 1 to you. Number 1, the very first recommendation of the master plan, to reclaim and repurpose the river. Increasing access to the Quinnipiac River for enjoyment of views as well as active recreation is an important way of enhancing the town's existing features. Connecting the river to the downtown, including by encouraging mixed-use development with housing on upper stories along some segments of the river's edge, takes advantage of views and breathes new life into underutilized areas. Rezone some segments of the riverfront nearest to the downtown for mixed use, including housing. We looked at this particular property quite some time ago, and we actually applied for an urban grant for this and were rejected. And we didn't get the grant, so we continued looking for other grants, and we eventually found this park grant. And as we applied for this, I had told town council, and they approved $100,000 at that time from free cash to be used to create a park, with my promise that I would not spend any of that $100,000 unless we were to receive a grant for a couple of $100,000 to build this park. This was the piece of property we had looked at, and we looked at this property in particular because it was close to our downtown area. It tied into our commons, and we thought it would be beautiful to be able to walk across the street from a commons event and be able to get near the river and utilize the river. We also felt, a whole group of us, when I first came here, took a tour to Putnam, Connecticut. And we talked to all the town officials in Putnam, and one of the things they talked about as creating a redevelopment in their town was the river, and how important it was, and how people came from far away to enjoy the river atmosphere. They do special events. They do fires on the river and do a variety of things. And that had a huge impact on economic development in Putnam. And that's another reason why we thought this would be nice, tying it into the commons. Now, I want to say, first of all, that I respect the fact that this was voted on unanimously, opposed to this at the General Government Committee. And I want to say very clearly that whatever the Town Council votes tonight, that I respect and work towards that, either for this park or against this park. I completely respect that the Town Council is the one that sets the policy for this.
I was asked if I should just back off on this and not go forward, being that the subcommittee voted unanimously against it. And I said, Councilor DePietro had asked me that question. I said, Councilor, with all due respect, this is something I think is important to the town, that I believe in it, and if it gets voted down at council, that's fine. But I've invested some parts of 2 years of work on trying to move this forward. And I'm very pleased that I worked out an agreement with, a gentleman's agreement with the owner of Franklin Realty to give us this property for $1. With the $234,000 of grant money and $100,000, we can build a beautiful park for the residents of this community. And I felt that that would be a huge asset for the community. Now, a lot of issues were raised. Some of them I thought really had some merit. Other ones, not so much, I didn't think. But I want to go through them because before you vote, I want you to have your questions answered. And quite frankly, I have to admit that I was somewhat surprised by the reaction in the General Government Committee and wasn't as prepared on a couple of the issues that I think I should have been. So I went and spent a great deal of time making sure that I answered those questions. The most important question was raised by Councilor Nash, I thought. And he said he was uncomfortable pursuing this without ensuring that the land is not contaminated. I gave a lot of thought to that and said, you know what, given some other things we've done in town, maybe we should check the contamination issue here, particularly because we're going to own this land. Once we own it, we're going to have it for a long period of time, so we need to do that. So my initial response was that this is a legitimate concern and should be looked at. I would suggest that up to $8,000 for a 21E environmental study to determine if contamination is an issue. While we do know that there were no buildings on the site, the question is, did anyone years ago dump any material that we do not know about onto this property? And I thought that was pretty reasonable, because I just don't know with the history of AO what occurred. Well, no significant ground breaking is going to occur here. We're going to be putting in some sidewalks and lights, but we're not going to be digging deep into this ground. I really wasn't very concerned, but it merits consideration. I had talked to our DPW director, and she talked to an environmental firm and found out the cost of doing the environmental study was between $5,000 and $7,500. That's why I was requesting $8,000. I had a call into the owner of Franklin Realty of this property because I wanted to see what he knew about the issue of contamination. Well, I was very pleased to hear that in the late 1990s, when AO owned this property, before they moved out of the property, they had a 21E or a phase 1 study of the entire property. And it was determined that nothing on this side of the river had any contamination, including that property, and for that purpose, there was no need to go further with a phase 2 evaluation. So he has those documents and would be pleased to share them with us because he believes that on this side of the river, there's no contamination issues. And in fact, the study was already done. If he can show that to us, there probably will be no need to do an environmental study. Now, a councilor did mention that there were some contaminations on issues on other properties in that development, and they're absolutely correct. Those were identified by DEP and those were taken care of, frankly, by AO at the time they were here, which I thought was great because most companies walk away. But AO made sure that that property was remediated before they even left the property, which was, I think, frankly, pretty spectacular. Not many companies these days do that. So I'm pretty comfortable that the land is clean, but if we found out after evaluating the information that the owner has, that we feel the need to do some more testing, I would propose that we take a couple of thousand from the town portion, the $100,000 we set aside to look at doing some further studies if we're not comfortable. But if we are comfortable that, I think we can put that issue aside. Now, another question was raised about the cost of maintaining current parks without adding another responsibility to the DPW. First, let me state, and after long discussions with the DPW director, that in fact we do general maintenance in all the parks. Really where we have let down, frankly, in terms of parks is in the capital needs. In other words, doing any improvements to the parks. So sometimes the equipment is old. I'll give you an example. The basketball courts at Henry Street need to be repaved or whatever that is. Those are the capital needs. The DPW does a pretty good job of mowing the grass and doing the general maintenance. They've been doing it for 2 years and doing a fair job. In the last 2 years, though, we've allocated $25,000 and $36,600 respectively from free cash to upgrade the fields and make improvements. And I compliment Councilor DePietro for his work in helping the town do that, some fencing and stuff at Henry Street Park. So not only have we maintained the parks, but we are making improvements to the park as a result of the support of this town council and its utilization of free cash. So yeah, it's Heather makes no bones about it, it's another bit of work she's going to have to do. But it's less work than most parks because there's no sporting events on it. The big parks that take the big heat are the ones where kids are running around the fields all the time. They put a lot of stress on the fields and the parks. So this one has less stress because it's essentially going to be a passive park where families can go and enjoy picnics or sit by the river, you know, whatever they want to do. It's not the kind of park that you would have heavy use in terms of damaging the ground, but it would require the general maintenance of mowing and making sure it was clean. Another question, I commented, and quite frankly, it was a failure on my memory. Mr. Sanangelo said he talked to the DPW director to whom he attributed the application cost estimates. He said she told him most of the costs in building it with not much necessary for maintenance. Now, just to be clear, to make sure that my response is correct, in fact, it was not Heather Blakely, our DPW director, who did that. I told Councilor Steves there was a mistake, that it was actually our economic development director went out of her way and got a engineering G Associates, an engineering firm, a gentleman named Mike Carter, who was kind enough to come in and give us an estimate of costs free of charge. So it was gratis. He came in, looked at it, and built us a high-level estimate. That estimate was, in fact, ran by our DPW director, who frankly thinks it's a little high and we could build one hell of a park for that amount of money. So I think the grant, the amount we're talking about to build a park is, if anything, probably a little bit too high, but hopefully we can build a park that is something that the citizens of this town can enjoy forever. Councilor Manner reiterated her concern about putting another burden on our police department with the likelihood that they'd find vandalism, trash, and other issues here. And I talked to the police chief about that issue because I wanted to make sure he was comfortable about that. He had no real concerns. In the summertime, he has members of the department who walk in this area already and also take a look at our trails and parks. He would just add it to their list of patrols. So he didn't express any significant concern. He thought it was a relatively minor issue. But I wanted to make sure that, Councilor Manner, that I did respond to your comments. Councilor Clements agreed, noting the governor can line item veto whatever he wants. This is in relationship. Sometimes, and I think Councilor Clements saw it firsthand, the town had gotten a grant to do some work up at the airport, and the state government was facing some issues and decided to, the governor decided to veto that money, and in fact the town never got it. So it raised a real concern that sometimes when you get money from state government, you don't get it until it's in the bank, and that was a perfect example of it. So I went out of my way to talk to legislators at a meeting I was at recently with a couple of councilors were there, and I asked those legislators if that could be a concern on this kind of issue, and they said no, it's not a concern. On these type of projects, when it's done by a department, they have a contract, and when they approve the grant with you, you sign a contract, and once you have that contract signed, they cannot veto that legislation. So in fact, once approved for this is one of the types of projects that would not be subject to the line item veto. The line item veto occurs when the legislature passes something, it never gets implemented into to a town or everything else. There's no contract signed, and before it gets kind of out there, he has a right to veto it, and he did so. But this would not be an issue as it relates to this. And Councilor Steve, one of the other questions was about the revenues and as it relates to that. The reason they do those line item vetoes is because there's a lower revenue expectation, or actually the revenues come in lower than expected, and therefore they need to find money to make up for those lower revenue estimates. Councilor Steves, in fact, in his minutes did some study of the issue and found out that as of right now, they're $178 million above the year-to-date benchmark. So in talking to those legislators, they said, well, we still got the rest of the year to go, but they feel pretty good about the way the revenues are coming in, and they don't see that as a problem this year. But even if it is, it won't affect us because, again, it's a grant that would be signed off in terms of a contract. Councilor DePietro said something, the Recreation Department is starved now, and it makes it hard to support this. To him, the project is solving somebody else's problem and making it look better. He said he knew a contractor who had priced removing and replacing the fence at a pretty significant number, over 300 grand. So I talked with our DPW director about this, talked with the owner of the property about this. A couple issues. I think he was referring to not only just taking it down, but replacing it, because that would how you get to some kind of cost, not just taking it down. Heather thought at very worst it'd be a couple of grand to get rid of the fence. It's a metal fence and it would have some value in it itself. We actually have a contractor in town who would like to take the fence, so he may be talking to the owner about taking the fence for free and taking it off the property because he wants to use it someplace else. So I don't see that as a problem. Recreation Department, we've given them, as I said, we've given them over 50, 60 grand in the last 2 years, and I think we need to continue to make sure that our parks are in good shape, and we should, as free cash allows, continue to invest in our parks. Several councilors said they were concerned that the fence might have to be replaced because of the slope steepness, but such cost is not included in the grant. In fact, it is. The cost of removing that fence was part of our grant application and getting rid of the fence. One of the concerns raised was that that fence stops people from going through into the river in their cars. And talking about that in terms that the fence is not very secure. In fact, you could probably push it over by hand, and it doesn't do anything to protect people from going in the river. In fact, as I listened to that, I kind of explored town and didn't find any fences near sidewalks or rivers. So I don't think it's a big river, but Heather did say that if we feel there's a concern when we do the design of the project, we can look at guardrails and put them up to ensure some safety. So there is a solution to that at a reasonable cost if there is some concerns about somebody driving the car off into that river. There was a question that was noted, and the counselor said to me, has never come up asking us to increase the amount we set aside to $116,452 from $100,000. Well, there's a real reason for that, is because never intended to come back to the town council asking for 116 grand. The town council already allocated 100 grand. As you know, in a lot of grants that we get, we're allowed to use our existing town resources, and that is counted as money towards the grant. We do that all the time on the rails and trails, where the town's contribution to a grant might be 30 grand, and we can do that all through staff use and staff time. So that is not an issue either. And frankly, now that they took out the $50,000 for the sidewalk and the $2,500 for the police detail, that would lower the percentage of our share is 30% of the grant. So that would lower our share to $100,750 anyway. So it's a very insignificant difference in terms of that. I just have a couple more, but I wanted to make sure all your questions were answered. Councilor raised questions about the manholes and who owns them, concerned that Franklin Realty might own them, and why should we be responsible for all those manholes? Well, that sounded like a really good legitimate concern, except that I found out, we contacted our sewer vendor and found out that we own it. All of those manholes are town-owned. It's an abandoned sewer line that the town had in place. So therefore, that's not a problem of Franklin Realty. It's a problem of the town of Southbridge. And frankly, we wouldn't probably remove them, although we could. We would probably get rid of the manholes and fill them in according to Heather, and then regrade the land. So it's something that's a town responsibility anyway. The question was raised regarding the issue of utilizing the $100,000 for the purpose of fixing roads. I want to be clear, and this is always a difficult issue in Southbridge. This is a one-shot revenue. This 100 grand came from free cash. It can only be used once. It's not a reoccurring revenue. So it's not something we would want to use for budgetary stuff. As we all know, doing any road is well over 100 grand. I mean, it's minor dollars in terms of road repair, but by using it for this park, it would create a park that would last a lifetime for citizens. So I think in this particular case, the citizens would get a lot more value out of something that they could enjoy for the next 50 or 100 years than fixing a tiny little sliver of a particular road. And then another question about the Army Corps. The last question is the Army Corps of Engineers. How come you haven't engaged them? Well, frankly, as I've learned about the Army Corps of Engineers in conversations with DPW and looking at information from them, they don't get involved in project until after there's a design of a project. So they would have the detailed design plan, and they would look, and frankly, what would happen is the person you had developed the design plan, the engineer, would advise you if you need to get them involved. But they are only involved in navigable waterways. So they don't really get too involved in the side of the river unless it has an impact somehow on the river itself. But at the time we did get a design plan to develop the park, they would look at that issue, the engineer for us would look at that issue and advise us as to what boards, commissions, or if we had to go to the Army engineers for a permit. But it seems unlikely we might need them, but maybe depending upon what we do on the sides of the river. Clearly, we do have to bring it to the Conservation Commission, and they will indeed, because it's a state river, bring it to the State Conservation Commission as well. With regard to the grant application, I had to have a conversation with Steve Rosenfeld, our Recreation Director, about this. What Steve did is we took all the grant information that Rosemary and I had worked on 2 years ago for the urban grant, and we gave it to Steve and said, Steve, just implement this into the new grant. And he had to just take that information, essentially cut and paste a lot of it, and then do some of the other preliminary work with the application. Steve had checked with the grant writer for the state of Massachusetts about the question of what is the description of Southbridge. And of all those descriptions that were there really wasn't one that fit our town very well. So he asked her what he should check off on that box. And her answer to that was, as far as we're concerned, you are a city, you have a city form of government, that would be the appropriate or the closest box to you. So he worked with the grant writer for the state to look at those grants, and that's how the 30% grant number came up. That grant was discussed between those two on a regular basis, and as far as we're concerned, the state grant writer was happy with the application, how it was drafted, and in fact recommended some of those answers to Steve. And quite frankly, I hadn't talked to Steve about that, and there was a recent conversation with Steve who advised me of that. So again, I think this is a valuable project. I am not going to be upset if town council feels otherwise, but I did feel that it was, because it was something in the master plan that the citizens of this town wanted, that it was my obligation to bring it forward, and again, I'll respect whatever the town council chooses to do with this.
Mr. DePietro, Councilor DePietro.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Certainly on its face, I mean, who would say no to a park? Certainly right across from the town common. Great idea. But from the standpoint of our parks, DPW, police, fire and rescue being overburdened as they are, this additional piece of property is going to have to be mowed. It's going to have to be maintained. It's going to have snow removal. It's going to have, not that it's a heck of a commute for the PD, but it's going to have to be patrolled. It's one more area for kids to get hurt, especially with the water, certainly a liability concern and fire rescue concern. And really, having perused it, if there was a little more of the flat grass area that was thrown in our direction, it'd be a little more palatable. As much as it's appreciated, the owners are giving this to us for $1. They're also selling a lot of their problems to us for $1. It's not the greatest parcel of land that they have there, to be quite honest. And I just don't see, with all these concerns, certainly, hopefully not a contamination concern. I'm sure that would be addressed anyways, but it's certainly in a floodplain, another concern. And I just think all these factors, they just don't justify the expenditure that we'd put out when we can't properly maintain the Parks and Rec we have now. I think we'll be biting off a little more than we can chew. But again, I appreciate all the effort and the time that was been spent from all you folks, truly. But in a dollar sense and liability sense and feasibility sense, I can't recommend it. But again, thank you.
Councilor Manna.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. So where it states in the box that's checked off for the grant, your municipality is an urban population center, parentheses, city of any size or town with 35,000 or more residents. Doesn't matter anymore now for a city or a town. We don't have 35,000 residents or more. Or more. We have less than 35,000 residents. So to me, this is just, it's misleading. And I just, along with all the other concerns and then the liability that we're going to have in the future with the maintenance, we're not guaranteed grants every year. And this was the same reason why the water slide didn't pass for the community, or the sprinkler, whatever we voted on a couple years ago. That was a huge concern. And this is another concern with just added concerns. So I can't support this, and especially with that box checked off still.
All set?
Yes, thank you.
Councilor Clare. Hey, Councilor Clare, you had a question?
Okay.
We'll go with you first.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. So, all right. Back in June of 2016, we allocated $100,000 towards this goal. The motion was made by Councilor Steves, seconded by Councilor Manna to vote this item, and the vote by roll call was councilors in favor, myself, Carrasco, Clements, Manna, and Steves. By 5-0, the vote passed. At that time, I don't recall any reservations on this park. Since then, I mean, it's pretty clear through, the grant application and all of the work that's been done for this project by the town manager, by by Rosemary Scrivens, by Steve, and I'm sure, other people are involved as well to try and make this happen and make this a reality, to turn that $100,000 that we've already appropriated for this project unanimously and turn that into $335,000 to, redevelop that park based on the recommendation from experts who really feel that there's a lot of value here. And there's a lot of value in having a Riverside Park. You can point to Putnam for what's happened with their downtown and the events that they're able to have. They do, I think, either first Friday or second Saturday every single week in the summertime. People go down there specifically for their Riverside Park. And I think that the plan was to mirror their success and hopefully gain what they've gained by redeveloping their town common and their park and their gazebo and everything. And so I guess I'm just really, really confused as to what has happened between June 6, 2016 and this general government subcommittee meeting where everybody was on board with this project and now nobody's on board with the project. And it doesn't sound like there's really too much that's come up. I agree with having an environmental study, or at least, being smart about this and making sure that we don't take any additional liability with contaminated properties. But aside from that, killing the project at this point in the game seems like we've just directed our manager for the past 2 years to do something that was never actually going to come to fruition, and a giant waste of everybody's time. So that's all I have for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other councillors who want to respond there? Councillor Steves?
Thank you. First off, I would like to back up for a second and say that I was part of the process back when we created the master plan. Okay, I was involved in those discussions. I remember there was the whole forum that went on down in McCann Room downstairs. And I was always in favor of doing something with the river. I think the concern with this particular project is that a lot of the answers that the town manager gave tonight are, at least for me, are questions that I've been asking for months. Like particularly the environmental issues, I've raised concerns about several of those points that I brought up at general government to him personally months ago. And we got no answers anywhere until we raised it at GenGov. Now he brings them answers forward. Okay, and some of the answers he brought forward are good. I will give him that credit, absolutely. But one point I would like to ask about is, like, for example, you brought up you said, Mr. Manager, that Mr. Norton said that there was the 21E study from the late 90s. Why didn't you get the text? because that would be really important for us to see exactly what they did and where it applied and where it didn't apply. Because that was my concern. That was a big concern for me. And as far as the riverfront itself goes, not only is the land itself a concern, but the fact that if we're going to be using the river, I can easily see paddle boats and canoes and stuff like that being in the river, which is what you would want a riverfront park for. But I'm also concerned about the fact that whether you've got a lot of the rivers where you've got industrial properties, the soil contamination in the bottom of the river is really nasty. I remember when I was a kid, and granted this was back in the 80s, walking through rivers and lakes and getting chemical burns because of the water. Okay, I don't want to see anybody else doing that. And I don't think that's necessarily the case now, because I'm sure a lot of this stuff is settled. But I also don't want to see it getting stirred up, because we know it's down there. So I was concerned about that. Also, I was concerned about the idea of, yes, the grant does call for removing the fence. And if somebody's willing to do it for free, that's even better. But I was also asking about the fact that the grant doesn't include anything for replacing the fence if we should need it, whether it be a fence or a guardrail or some such thing. Because as we have seen in the past several years, there have been people who've gone right through that fence into the river and killed themselves. It's happened a few times. Whether that was intentional or by accident, I don't know, but it happened. So we don't want to see that happen, especially if it's a park there where there are people playing on it. That would be not good. Also, I've been concerned for some time, and I don't think I brought this up specifically at GenGov, but I have mentioned it to the town manager before, that we never saw the surveying contract for this project, ever. We haven't even had an actual final cost for it, and we've never seen the surveying documents either. That bothers me. Okay, I'm very much in favor of doing something in the river. We should. And there are definitely benefits to this particular parcel, because it's among the places I can think of that have access to the river. It certainly has the easiest access to the river of places I can think of. And it's certainly being downtown is a plus, no question about that. Those were the concerns that I had, and some of the answers, he answered some of them this evening. Some of them are still unanswered.
Awesome.
Yep.
Okay. Councilor Carrasco?
Yes, I just have a couple concerns and a couple points here of things that have been mentioned. Number one, the splash park. It was mentioned today that maintenance and equipment and stuff like that was a major issue in regards to why we voted it down. But I recall that was a pretty lengthy conversation, and I recall Councilor Peliquin really at the time pushing and saying we need one of these because it's easy maintained. It's just something that kids can go and play. But the biggest question was, who's going to pay the water bill? That was the question. It wasn't nothing to do with the creation of another park. No, it was the creation of a water bill. We were averaging anywhere between, we were going to pay anywhere between $20,000 for a splash park while we were going to get something for free. That was the issue with the splash park, that I believe the council made the right decision in regards to that, because we were going to make a beautiful facility but have to pay a water bill. And not only pay a water bill during the summer, but then winterize the whole thing, make sure it's all taken care of, so then we couldn't do that. This park, number one, I hear play. Nobody's going to play on this park, number one. This is more of a scenic, recreational, walking distance here. You're not going to have a volleyball court. You're not going to have any of this stuff. This is more of an attraction, sit-down facility where people can just come and relax. You know, the problem with our parks is, for so many years, I kudos this council and the last council that we finally put some money aside for parks. We had a committee running our parks before we hired Mr. Rosenwald, and he's doing a great job on a part-time basis. So in regards to parks, the problem is the kids continue to use the equipment. The kids continue to play. But this council for so many years did not decide to upgrade their equipment, to invest in our kids. We say all the time we're about the kids and nothing, but guess what? The parks are the number one thing that we don't care about. If they're using the equipment, that's why it's going to go bad. That's why it's going to go rotten. That's why it's just going to get wear and tear. It's normal. That's what they're there to do. So in regards to upkeep, it's not the DPW's fault. It's this council's fault. Let's stop blaming other people. It's us. We never put money aside to give them the proper tools to be able to fix the things. Because let me tell you, I went down there with the town manager. Let me tell you, we replaced that basketball hoop. It's not broken. It's fixed. But for 4 years, 4 years. And yeah, I'm raising my voice because I'm passionate about it. Because yeah, I go down there. I'm a coach. I see the kids wanting to play. But for 4 years, they had no basketball hoop. And I think it was one of the first times I met now Councilor DePietro, where he was welding that equipment, that basketball hoop. It just baffles me that we spend thousands of dollars on a report. We finally have a proactive town manager that's trying to do something, reaching out to business owners, property owners, getting something done, and this is just an appropriation. We're not spending this money. This is just, let's put it aside so we can see if we can do something. But we'd rather not even do it. We're going to kill the project once and for all. We don't even know we're going to get the grant. So this is just, let's put it aside. If it doesn't get spent, guess what? It stays in Southbridge. That money stays in Southbridge. But we have a direction where we're going with this facility, with a park. You want to do something with the river, but if we do have that 21E, I would like to see it also, because I want to make sure that there is no contamination where we're going to do this. But if there's no contamination, guess what? This is probably the only part of town that we're going to be able to do something with that river, because everything else is secluded, away. So, I mean, I just don't understand. I can tell you what happened after June. It's obvious. Because this conversation, it wasn't just a vote on June 6th. This was part of the budget presentation. This was part of all the discussions we had from April till June. So for all of a sudden now, December, the change of direction, well, we know what's going on. But this is part of the issue, that we have something moving forward, we have a picture, but these excuses, the way I read it, I know Councilor Manna is reading it differently, but the way I read that portion of that application, it says, a city of any size or a town. So if the grant writers are saying we are considered a city because of our city form of government, because of the way we operate, then that first 5 words is a qualifier. Never mind the population, because now you've just excluded that because it's a city. So I'm reading it different, but again, it's everybody's perspective and interpretation, so it's okay. But I'm baffled in regards to the things that are being brought forth. I mean, it's the #1 priority of our master plan, and we finally, what year was that, Ryan? That master plan?
2014, I believe.
2014, but it was about 2 years worth of work. 13, and plus 2 years of work. I mean, you're looking at 6 years later, and we're finally getting one of the priorities trying to accomplish, and we're going to kill it once and for all by our vote tonight. If we're not comfortable, let's not vote on this tonight. Hold it. It's got to be voted. Then, thank you for your hard work.
Councilor McKenzie.
Thank you, Chair Lady Clements. My feeling is this. I'm kind of on the fence on this one, and I came into this meeting on the fence. But the one thing that I keeps hitting me in the back of the head is that we've got something here that adds tremendously to Southbridge. It upgrades Southbridge to such a level that it would draw people here. We're looking through all kinds of ways, through business, through whatever we can do to get people to come to Southbridge. And this is a motivator to have people come to see our town and fall in love with it like we care about it. So that's my only statement. I think that we really need to look at what we might be losing if we vote this down tonight. I think what we really need to do is maybe baby steps, or maybe we've been taking baby steps. Maybe we got to start walking. If we're not ready to make a decision tonight, then we'll put it off until we're maybe more understanding. But we need to be unified, and we need to be supportive of anything that we can do to enhance Southbridge. That's my feeling. Thank you.
Okay, Councilor DePietro.
Madam Chair, 2 points. Number one, perhaps maybe this could go back burner and we could discuss it further.
Has to be done according to the town manager.
Right. Number two, I wonder if we could maybe, with your permission, put Heather on the hot seat here for a moment. And I would be surprised if she couldn't compare the yearly maintenance for the common as it sits now to the proposed park. And maybe give us a rough dollar figure, because I think that's in the same realm of maintenance, if I'm not mistaken.
It's a good comment. And I'd be happy to let her talk about those things. I'm going to make some comments then too, since everyone has had an opportunity to speak. And some of the comments, I believe, recently were maybe a little pointed. So first I want to clarify that the vote to spend $100,000 on some type of waterside park to move forward, any waterside park, not necessarily this particular item, was done in 2016, June of 2016, not June of 2017, June of 2016. I just want to be really clear that it was done a while back. And when the master plan was formed in 2013, I believe we said the vote was, or thereabouts, you know, things might have looked a little bit different too fiscally in our community. I'm just going to make that statement because things have changed drastically over the last 6 months to a year in our community, especially probably in the last 6 months fiscally. Speaking of fiscal, I appreciate the town manager answering all the questions that we had from general government meeting. Most of those questions were brought to him in August when Councillor Steves and I sat in his office after we had received an email, like all other councillors, with this park grant attached, saying, happy news, councillors, not exactly that, it is councillors, we're very excited to let you know that we've applied for a waterfront grant. And we looked through that grant. I looked through that grant, apparently you looked through that grant, maybe others did, and there were a lot of questions I had in that grant, and asked much of what you heard tonight then. Didn't get many answers. There was one big comment that was made again tonight, that was made in that office back in August, and that had to do with when we questioned the purchase of this land, $1 or free, it was still an acquirement by the community, by the town, by the council, and it was commented that it was a gentleman's agreement, and Councillor Steves and I both were surprised to hear that comment. That's illegal according to Mass General laws, but that's okay, all right? Not really, it's for the good of the town. So I had concerns personally right away with why hadn't we not been brought in prior to this concept? How is it that so much work was being done over 2 years, and yet we only just, we never even, this grant or what it involved never came to council, never came to a subcommittee, nothing, it just got done, and I applaud the work that was done on it by Mr. Roenfeld or whoever else, Rosemary, because a lot of the questions, all the questions I think, I don't know if there was one question we asked about the paperwork on that grant that the manager could answer that day. And I commented, this is your grant, you signed it, I want the answers. The buck stops with you. That's what I said. So,
We didn't get any more answers, and I just assumed, you know, it was done, it was sent in, so I assumed it would come back and we'd know whether or not we got this grant, and we were sort of stuck with it. But then this came forward, and it looked like the state wanted to make sure they had crossed their T's and dotted their I's, and now they asked us to vote to appropriate this money. And yes, it's supposed to not take effect unless we get the grant. But if we get the grant, so we have to be really sure we want the grant, we have to be really sure we want the responsibility, the liability, and the cost for this park. Because if we vote on this yes, that's why it takes a 2/3 vote, because this is really important. 2/3 vote to appropriate money. We're appropriating over $200,000. And a vote like that, like buying a fire engine or anything else, requires a lot of thought and a lot of consideration, because once we vote to do this, this is a reimbursement grant. The town has to borrow this money, appropriate this money, pay for this park before they get reimbursed from the state. So those were some major concerns that I personally had, and I believe others had, and that was a lot of the conversation that went on in that general government meeting. So to clarify, one of the things that the town manager mentioned, yes, for the last quarter, the state was up. The first quarter of this fiscal year, the state was up $178 million. Mass finished the fiscal 17, $431 million shortfall, and we still have to deal with that in the state of Massachusetts. Just so you know, Baker's already vetoed $320 million from the $39.4 billion budget, and my conversations with our state senator and others have said that we're not sure how we're going to handle it next year. So it may not affect this grant, but I want to be clear that those are concerns that we who live in this state should have. Maintenance, I still think I don't think we're being realistic with the maintenance of this piece of property. I'm glad to hear there was an environmental study done. Of course, we should be seeing it if we're going to actually vote on something that, I'm tired of doing the after stuff. This council should be made aware prior. This information should have been brought to us over all these months, even if we didn't have a say. So even if the state never asked us to do this tonight or before the 31st, this information should have provided to this council who makes decisions for the taxpayers out there. That tax rate we talked about tonight, it's not going any further. It's not going down. It's going up. There are a lot of budget issues we have to deal with. Rec will probably be one of them. Police, fire, DPW, any of those could be losing jobs. Everybody should be concerned about the state of our community, because fiscally we are going to have issues. Charter school was mentioned. You're absolutely right, Councilor O'Clair. We have issues here that pertain to money, not just because the revenues are going away from the landfill, but also because of charter school and the state receivership and everything else. So it's nice that the Economic Development Office went out and got cost estimates. There was one question I asked, and I was told that it was Heather who had done it. Clearly it wasn't. And I'm glad we got the answer to that. As far as Mr. Norton, the master plan didn't say we had to have this park. The master plan said we should open up pathways to the water, we should plan developments, and it's being done. Mr. Norton is planning a beautiful development right there, and I applaud him, and I hope that he succeeds in that. He's going to hopefully have nice housing right there on the right-hand side, and it would be really nice for him to have a nice connecting walkway over to the conference center. But if anybody goes out to that piece of land and takes a walk, like we did last week in the real cold, you'll see the pins in the ground, and you walk. And I guess I could use the word disgusted. I thought I said disappointed, but I'd use the word disgusted because the plot of land that we're looking at is this depressed area that obviously floods, and this strip that goes along the fence. As a child, I walked along that fence all the time and looked at the Christmas stuff behind it. Beautiful to walk along the fence and look at the river. Safer on my side of the fence. I don't know how we can get away with taking that down and allowing. There's in some areas 3 feet maybe to the brush and to the drop off, 4 feet at the most. That's what we're acquiring, a 1 acre pork chop, or lollipop, I guess you'd call it, offset lollipop. It's not the greatest piece of land. If this was a really good deal, we'd be getting that nice piece behind the sign, like the whole waterfront section there on the river. We're getting this little piece that we're gonna take down this decrepit fence and make it beautiful. That's great. These are some of the concerns that were brought up in August. And again, I am glad for the report that was presented here tonight. But for me personally, I think it's too little too late. There are other opportunities. There's Crane Street River, there's West Street River, as Councilor Steves has pointed out. What a beautiful area that is with picnic tables and all. You know, you can walk along the river, the Quinnebog River there behind West Street School. It's absolutely beautiful. I just don't see how this can be compared to Putnam. This is a little teeny piece of property. It's not Putnam. We have a beautiful town common. There are people there, but they're not droves of people sitting in the beautiful town common. And it needs to be maintained, lots of trash everywhere. I just don't see how this can be, this has a lot of liability issues to me and a lot of uncertainties. And I just don't agree with it. And I just wish we had had the information in a more timely manner. I think I've hit all my points. Thanks for listening. We'll move on. Do you want to hear from Councillor DePietro? Would you like to hear from Heather, Ms. Blakely first, DPW Director, or do you care?
Actually, all of the above, Madam Chair. It's at your discretion.
Okay, so Mr. Roenfeld, feel free to speak.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify a couple, well, actually one thing, especially with, in regards to Mr. McKenzie's comment about waiting on the vote. December 31st, 2017 is the deadline in which this item needs to be passed, or else we are disqualified for the grant. So the state requires that the approval of this vote is done by December 31st, 2017.
Question, Mr. Roenfeld. You did not get an urban grant back when you were first looking at grants. When did you see this park grant? When did you become aware of this park grant, this particular grant? When did you actually become aware of it?
I mean, I'm not sure of the date.
I don't need the date. How about the month?
Yep. So basically in late spring is when the park grant open period begins through the state. And I was made aware of it basically right around that time.
This year?
Of this year.
Okay, thank you. All right, anything else? Anybody have any questions for Mr. Roenfeld? Thank you. I know Rosemary, Heather, somebody was up before.
I don't have a dollar amount, but I can give you a function of how many hours I think we'd spend. I would approximate it about 4 hours a week for maintenance, including picking up trash and mowing, being the maintenance that I'm discussing. Any additional maintenance above that, you know, I'm not really sure what the final design will look like, if it requires mulching of flower beds and things of that nature. Obviously, that takes a little more time. But the mowing with the size machines we have in the area that we're looking at and picking up the trash is probably about 4 hours a week. In addition, the section of the sidewalk, which I want to clarify, we are not taking over the whole fence area. So a lot of that area where that fence is still going to be requirement of AO property. We're only taking over the section that we're purchasing, which frontage on that fence, there's already fence missing there. It's not the whole area of the fence. But we would have to take over that sidewalk. It's $90 an hour for our sidewalk clearer. So I would say that's going to take him probably a good hour, maybe two. So that's $200 a snowstorm. So looking at cost.
Any questions for Ms. Blakely? Councilor Nash.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Director Blakely. Heather, could you speculate a little bit on what the status is of the storm drains and the outfalls at the river at that site? What's going to be required to bring them up to snuff?
The storm drainage and the outfalls? That would really be part of our overall stormwater picture. Obviously, with redeveloping that park, we try to naturalize them as much as possible and take them out of the state that they are now, where they're kind of not naturalized, but you actually have to keep a lot of vegetation around those, and I've discussed that with the town manager when I've walked down there. Also, a lot of that natural vegetation that's along the river will have to stay in place. That's just the way it is. You're talking about keeping a grassed-in area, putting benches, putting picnic tables, putting a walkway that you can meander around closer to the river, and potentially finding one location that you can get access. But you're going to just have to naturalize them. That's all part of what the final design would be.
So can I ask for elaboration, please? So what we were looking at for numbers here accounts for the crumbling concrete The deteriorating
I haven't
pipes?
looked at that whole thing. It was a conceptual design. We're talking extremely high level. You have to still pay to have it designed. That's all part of this. You're talking a very high level estimate with some very preliminary concepts. So those are detailed design questions that we'd have to get into. Yes, we'd have to address stormwater. You're not going to do major, those things aren't huge costs as it is. You're not going to put cleanup stormwater on those drains. No, I'm not talking about oil water separators and all of that. No, you're talking about naturalizing with natural beds and vegetation. You're not talking about doing high-level stormwater treatment there.
I was actually most concerned with the structures themselves, Heather. They looked horrendous.
Those structures actually that look horrendous are from an abandoned sewer line. They're not storm drains.
Okay.
That's abandoned sewer line that they never actually took the manholes out. So
like the box culverts that are at the river parallel to the storm grading that's in the street.
I haven't looked at them that
Those are actually what I'm referring to, and I'd be happy to ask you about that later.
In addition, truthfully, those are ours. So whether we get this grant or not, we're probably having to do something to address them in the future anyways. We own those discharges, they don't.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. This isn't actually directed at you or to you, but my concern wasn't whether or not we own those, because that's been clarified. It really is the condition of those items. Thank you.
Just on your, have you gone behind that fence and walked the entire place?
I've walked along the edge of the fence in the back of it.
Have you gone and walked the proposed pathway?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, no, because I don't.
Have you gone and walked the proposed pathway from
I've gone and walked in back of the fence, yes, from the start of the property to the other side.
To the other side?
Yes.
Okay, over the downed fence areas and stuff like
Yes.
that? Okay, I just wanted to make sure. All right. Okay, Councilor Clare?
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. To Ms. Blakely. So the abandoned sewer line that the town is liable for, we'll probably have to do something at some point. If we appropriate this money and get the grants, could technically save us hassle in the future, or?
I would hope that it would be able to be incorporated in the final design so that they would be handled, correct.
So, okay. Thank you.
I see some unclassified excavation of $18,000. I mean, I don't see any listing for that, what you're saying, so I guess I'd be curious to know how that fits into this.
I think that's a high-level estimate. If the state was going to be that nitpicky about it, I guess we would have to get clarification in our final design that they were going to accept that. But again, high-level versus, to me, what we have there is okay, this is potential costs, and this is what we see as potential costs. They didn't do a detailed cost estimate. I mean, it's very broken down. I understand what you're saying, but again, there's no final design here. There's no bridge design there. It says bridge. It doesn't tell you what the bridge is going to be. You have to do all of those things before you get hard and fast numbers.
Right.
And when you do designs, you identify things like sewer manholes that are abandoned that need to be handled.
Thank you. Councilor McKenzie.
Actually, I'd like to direct this question to Mr. Roenfeld, if I may. You had indicated that there was a timeline of December 31st. We have another meeting scheduled for, I believe, December 19th. 18th. Would that give you enough time, if we made a decision on that time, on that date, rather than tonight? And the reason I ask this is because, to be honest with you, I've been negligent. I have not seen the property, and I'm a little bit concerned about the property itself from what I'm hearing here. I'd like to actually look at it. Now, I don't want to hold up a vote because I haven't looked at it. We don't have to do that, but I would like to see it. And I think maybe if anyone else has not seen the property itself, maybe they might want to look at it too. Is there a possibility that we could vote on this on the 19th rather than tonight?
Yes, what could happen is, so we've been awaiting word from the state on whether our application has been approved. and that could come at any time. Actually, it was anticipated that it would happen at the beginning of November. That has been, then they said it was taking longer to go through all the applications, and therefore we obviously have not heard who's been awarded the grant. The December 31st deadline is simply that we could still get approved, but unless the vote happens, but it's dependent on a yes vote that we are appropriating this money. So yes, as long as the vote occurs before December 31st, we're okay.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
But after December 31st, obviously, if we haven't voted on it, then even if we were awarded the grant, the money that they have promised in reimbursement would go away.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Councillor Nash.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Mr. Roenfeld, or perhaps the town manager, I'm not sure, and I don't recall what the answer was in subcommittee if it came up, but what is the pool of available funding for this particular grant that's being made available to the municipalities in the Commonwealth? Is it one grant award to one community?
No, it's multiple communities are awarded this grant. I don't know what the actual total number is. Each municipality, and this is where that the discussion regarding whether we're a town, whether we're a city, is actually very important, because in the issue of if the state considered us a town and we have less than 35,000 people, then we're only eligible up to 250,000 reimbursement. But the fact that the state considers us a city, based on a number of different factors, that opens up the reimbursement eligibility to $400,000. Now, obviously, we're not asking for that maximum amount because our project doesn't really reach that maximum amount. And as Heather has noted, more than likely, we won't even reach this number that's proposed, but obviously you want to bid high because you don't want to be left with extra bills that can't be paid. So the project cost that is set before, or was that we proposed to the state, I can't guarantee that it's over what will be reality, but we do factor that in terms of creating the estimate of the cost.
Okay, Councillor Kraska.
Yes, I just thank you, Steve, for making that point in regards to the reimbursements. But my question would be towards our Economic Development Director, Rosemary, because I know you've been doing a lot of work, and I remember going on a tour to Putnam, and you've met with them, and you've met with a lot of other municipalities and cities and towns, and I know you've been breaking your head onto developing economic development, making Southbridge a place of attraction. Is this something that, I know it's before us, I know the council's, but I know we've heard from Heather, we've heard from Steve, but I want to hear from you, because I want to hear from the economic development piece of the project, because our town manager, his job is to sell us these things. But you're an expert in regards to your field of work. So I want to hear, is this project, even this little strip, because again, we're not owning the whole thing. So if this little strip, does it have the potential? Is it something that we should continue to pursue? Or if not, then a no vote would satisfy?
I feel very strongly that for the amount of money, which is a relatively small amount of money, 2/3 of it not even our money, free money, needed to do this, the impact is really great. If you look at what's happened to other communities, we're very lucky that we have a river that runs through our community. Other communities would die for that, because people are naturally drawn to water. And not only does the river run through our town, it runs through our downtown. So that's what's even more important, is to have a park right in the middle of our town. I've seen all of the parks. I've hiked along the West Street section of the river. It's gorgeous, but you know what? A lot of people don't even know it's there. It's hidden. Now, I want to change that, but that's not going to be the draw that a downtown waterfront park would be. So I have seen and heard of many communities where their revitalization starts with either opening up some waterway that was covered over, or where they had the water, they just never did anything about it, and once they did, it kind of exploded. It can really be a trigger for economic development, especially in a downtown. So I just want to mention a couple of other things just to clarify. Chairman Clements was talking about the fact that this grant, we have to wait to be reimbursed, but actually that's true of the MassWorks grant and most any grant that we would apply for. It would be a reimbursable grant. So, you know, the state feels, hey, they're giving you free money. The town has to find a way to front the money. That's extremely common. I also, I wanted to reiterate, but I think Stephen already did that, about they made the distinction, because I had the same conversation with this agency. They made the distinction that we are a city, so our population didn't matter. If we were a town, they would look for us to have a population of greater than 35,000. We have an urban core, and there's some other aspects of the town that makes the state look at us as a city, and that actually benefits us. You know, a lot of the points that I was going to make have been made, but I really do want to iterate. I mean, you saw what's happened with Putnam. Of course, there's, you know, a lot of factors at play there, but certainly that river with the park is one of them. So that's about all I have to say.
Thank you in regards to the economic piece. Now, my next question would be for Steve. You're doing a great job with what's been handed to you, and I want to publicly recognize that before everyone. And understanding that this would be an additional park, what do you foresee as activities that you can tie down there, that you can tie into the common? Is it something that can be used as a tool for your department, as a recreation department, for activities to draw people in? Or is this going to be something that's going to be more of a burden to your department?
No, I think you actually made a really good point earlier in the discussion, in that, you know, the focus of this type of park is a very passive park. So in terms of like long-term upkeep and what is done at the park, you know, it's very easy to understand that, you know, it's you know, there's two categories of parks. There's passive parks and there's active parks. Active parks we think of as ball fields and playgrounds and basketball courts and things like that, which have a high kind of maintenance cost and also have specific user groups. Whereas a passive park is kind of open to everyone and is very easily accessible, which as a town, we do not have a lot of, because even our more passive parks like town trails and things like that are not easily accessible for some of the population. In terms of adding value to the kind of our set of parks, I think yes, because it allows us to expand some of the things that we can do at the Common. So it allows us to add additional events that can be placed at such a park. So for example, I mean, we keep bringing up Putnam, but you know, they do things like fire and ice. So we could copy them and do something very similar to that. We could expand things like the holiday visions, not only from the Mrs. Clements does a great job of doing. We could expand that to additional places along the riverside as opposed to just on the town common. So there's lots of things we can do. We could expand, not only just have concert series, but there's actually been, you know, people who like our concert series but want to make it something bigger and better, like more of like a music festival. So this type of park would allow us to kind of designate a space that can be more easily monitored for something like someone bringing in a music festival, which is a little tougher to do on a town common space, things like that.
Thank you.
Councilor DePietro.
Madam Chair, again for Mr. Rosenfeld, I just want to make sure I understood you correctly. This grant is not guaranteed.
I think you need to rephrase the question. What do you mean by not guaranteed? As in, like, our approval hasn't been guaranteed?
No, when we were discussing your timetable, you kept referring to the grant as if we get it, if we're approved, if this, if that. So it's not a guaranteed grant.
Correct. So we have gone through the application process. We've met with the State Department in charge of the grant. And all the communities who have applied for this grant, the entire pool is still waiting for word on what municipalities were approved. And so we're just kind of in a wait mode. This vote that we're asking you to do is a requirement of the grant. So whether this was done 2 months ago or whether it's done now, it's a requirement of the grant approval, but we can be approved for the grant even without this vote. It's just if we were approved and we didn't have on file that we made this vote before December 31st, they would rescind our approval.
So in other words, we could very well appropriate this money and not end up with this grant, is my question.
Yes, you can appropriate the money, but it's also, the appropriation is dependent on the award of the grant. So if we appropriate this money, if we say, yes, we will make a, basically what you're doing is making a promise that you're going to get $338,000 and some change, and a few extra as a commitment to the state that you are willing to put in the effort and energy to make this park happen. Because what so often happens is municipalities go after grant money with not a real commitment. They really want, to see if they can get it, and then they'll try to figure out whether they can make that grant happen. In this particular grant, the state really wants us to say, yes, if we are awarded the grant, we're going to do something with this money. There's also part of the grant approval process is that if we are awarded the grant, that the project needs to be completed somewhere towards the end of 2018.
And you're aware these funds may actually have to be borrowed to make this commitment?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Right. So just I think, I'm not sure if you're understanding him. So we appropriate the money to say we're willing to borrow it, regardless. If we get the grant, we go forward. We get the money, we do it. If we don't get the grant, we don't go forward, obviously. We don't need to borrow it. But they need to know that we're committed to borrowing the money if we get the grant.
Yeah, I'll add
we
one
don't
more.
have to do it if we don't get the grant, obviously. And then we can reappropriate if the money is not used, it just has to be voted back. Or if we don't actually go out for the borrowing of it or anything, then we have to vote it back in, I believe, or something.
So a couple of comments here. First of all, we're not sure we would have to borrow because sometimes we use what's called liquid cash in the short term when it comes to doing these type of projects. But Councilor Clements is correct that if we decide not to use the $100,000 for this purpose, the town council could vote it. It would eventually vote it to go into free cash or for some other purpose. So you could reallocate that funds for some other purpose, whatever that might be.
And I would like to add that, so if we're approved for this grant, and we've, like Ms. Clements said, we would either borrow the money or get it from free cash. However we generate the funds to do it, we would spend the money. So let's say at the end of the project we spend, and I'll just do a number that's easy math, $300,000 was the total cost of the project. You've already allocated $100,000 towards this project already through free cash. So what that would mean is $200,000. We would send in to the state a bill of $200,000 and proof that we've spent an extra $200,000 on this project, and then they would in turn reimburse that money. Part of the grant is that.
Are we doing a percentage, isn't our deal a percentage of the total amount of the project? So I'm not so sure we give 100 and they give less. I'm not positive about that. I know we allocated 100, but my point being, yeah, I thought this grant was a percent. We had to put up a percentage of what we asked for.
So we can submit up to 70% of the total cost of the project. Right. Yeah, sorry, I misspoke.
So if we don't expend 100, we could spend 70 or 60.
So if we spend 300, if the project costs $300,000, we owe 30% of that.
It's not quite black and white with the one and the two. Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. Right. Okay. Are we good with the numbers?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. Okay, so I've got a whole list here, though. Manna was first, then you. Councilor Manna.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you.
And then
I do understand the concept that the state sees our town as a city, as our town went through special legislation to stay a town. So legally, we are a town, even though the state still sees us, they see us as a city. Legally, on paper, we're a town. So I just want to make that clear. So I see in here that we have some lights going in, 7 at $5,000 each, $35,000. So that means we are going to have an electricity cost for lighting. I know there was a concern a couple years ago about the lights on Main Street. Let's have one half off, one half on because of the cost. And also, it's going to bring up our insurance. So how much does this factor in, like the electricity and the insurance increase? Because now we have to, like, insure the park.
A question to me?
Sure.
Whoever can answer
Okay,
it.
so thank you. First of all, the lighting costs I expect would be low, and I would expect that we would do everything in our power to make this a green project where
But
perhaps
low,
we could
I know
use
you say
solar
low,
and...
But what, like, is there an estimate, just a guesstimate?
So I don't know the exact amount. Again, I would think we would try to use solar to reduce costs as much as possible for this particular park. In terms of insurance, I can check with Minnie, but I think the insurance would be nil. The town has an overriding policy coverage for all the land in town that the town owns. This is open vacant land. I don't believe that this is going to change because we already cover all of our parks. So if there's any cost, it would be very, very minimal, and I would really expect it to be zero.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Councilor Steves, then Councilor Clare.
Thank you. I have a couple of quick questions. I'm not sure exactly who can best answer them. One is that, first of all, I guess the first one is to you, Steve. When did you know that we needed to take this vote?
When did we need to
When
take this vote?
when did you learn from the state that we needed to take this vote?
When were you notified about
It was in the grant application materials. And what happened was we had submitted the approval language as a part of our grant application process, and the person who reviewed our application came back to us and said we needed to rewrite the language that we had put in our first application. And so that's the language that you see in front of you right now. Is we had submitted what basically the appropriation of the $100,000 designation. Right. That wasn't sufficient. They needed the full total, and that's what you see in front of you.
Okay. And also, let's see here. Do you? I don't know. I'm assuming this would be. I don't know if you can answer it, Ron, or if we'd have to be Karen who can answer it. But if we're borrowing this money, what kind of impact would it have on taxes and our 2.5 limit?
Let me if I could just clarify a question and an answer Steve had, because it's not quite accurate, right? So when we originally did the grant, they asked for language, language we would use like this to apply to actually have this vote tonight. We actually gave them language like this, and we went through her, and she agreed to this. I happened to be at a conference on Thursday, Friday of a week or two ago, and they asked for this to be, that we had voted on it. Yvonne, not realizing what the grant application said, send them the language on the $100,000 vote. And when I came back, I said, no, that's not what they wanted. This is the language. She once again looked at it and said, nope, you guys are fine. You don't have to change it. So she did have it. The reason Steve's talking about that, Yvonne was a little confused because I just happened to be at a conference that day. But they've had this language for quite some time.
Okay. I'm going to actually interject here because I don't agree with your statements. You can say that's how it is, but attach number 16 on the grant application that you signed, and we questioned this in your office. Attach certification of the Chief Executive Officer's legal authorization to execute contracts. This is a resolution, motion, or similar action that has been duly adopted or passed as an official act of the community's governing body that authorizes the filing of the applications, including all understandings and assurances contained therein, the signator, signatory, usually a page from the town city charter, will satisfy this requirement. This is not DCS form to be completed, and the authorization from the chief municipal officer identifying individuals named on the first page of the application acts as the official municipality in connection to the application. So they were looking, I know you attached the charter, but in our charter it says that council is the one who ratifies all contracts. So this, what they were looking for was language that said that we approved you sending that grant in, which is part of the problem, that we didn't see the grant until after it was sent in.
So through you, Madam Chairman, we're talking about two different issues.
Okay.
You're correct. One issue was that they need to know by charter if I had the power to apply for the funds, which is the information our charter allows me to apply for grants and requires town council to approve, to actually accept grants and to sign contracts on them. But the question that they wanted to know is who could actually apply for them. The charter gives me that authority. That was one separate issue. The second issue was if there was going to be a vote to appropriate this, what the language would look like. I know it occurred because I worked with her a couple of months ago to draft this language, so I knew it was there. She asked for it again, probably not having looked at the language we turned in. Yvonne then sent her a vote for the 100,000 thinking that would be appropriate, and I called her back up when I came back and said, no, we already sent you the grant. I sent her what I had already sent her back months ago. She said, you're correct, that is right, for this language here tonight. So it's two different issues is what we're talking about.
Well, understandings and assurances, but okay. All right, who's next? You'll sit?
Did I have another question? Oh, yeah, I had asked.
Did
yeah,
you?
Okay.
Karen has left. She,
okay.
so she's left. But before she did left, she had said to me, if it was 200,000, we would likely not borrow. We would be able to float that amount of money in what we have in our cash. We don't borrow until we know we need to borrow for money. So it wouldn't be borrowed. We would just spend it and then get it reimbursed, spend it and get it reimbursed. So.
Do you know how long it would take for reimbursement?
I don't, but I know that most of the state grants work about the same, and they're usually within 30 to 60 days of us turning in that we get our reimbursements. And they send them directly right into our bank account. All we did is get is a statement that says it's been deposited.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilor Clare.
Thank you. I had my hand up earlier. My question was answered.
Oh, okay. More questions to anybody? Councilor Nash. What?
Thank you. I don't actually have a question for anybody that was at the podium, so I'm happy to wait with my comments if you'd like to continue.
Nothing for me to continue.
Okay. I didn't know if somebody else was going to be addressed.
Well, then he needs to step up to the podium. I didn't know if he's just standing against.
Hi, Dimitri Kasperson, 51 North Street. I'm a citizen. I opened a small business here 3 years ago, and I was also very involved in the master plan process. I attended every meeting. It's my recollection from doing that as is noted by the town manager when he read that opening paragraph of the master plan, riverfront access was a key component of the master plan process. It was identified as one of the biggest economic stimulants that you could do to this town for a number of reasons, one being that Massachusetts, in this part of Massachusetts, has been identified as tourism being one of the strongest economic drive items that you should focus on as a community. When I was working on that, we did extensively look at the river, and this particular parcel was identified as really not only the best, but the only place that you could do this. I know that there was a letter circulated to some of the councilors suggesting maybe the area behind 12 Crane Street might be possible. That's off limits because that's owned by the Department of Transportation, and they've actually told the town it cannot be used, even for parking. It's not supposed to be being used. And beyond that, if it were used, you have a cliff there. This is, the potential to put in a waterfront park that has all sorts of future possibilities to it. I don't know as far as what the town might be able to do revenue-wise, but, you could imagine gondolas or paddle boats or something like that, and the Economic Development Office under Steve might be able to raise revenue for that. possibly, if there's a podium there or a pavilion, you could have people rent it for weddings. It seems to me like it's ripe for making money, not losing money. I'd also like to point out that I grew up in Woodstock. I was born in Southbridge, but I spent a lot of time here at my grandparents' house. My grandfather worked at the mill for 40 years as a lens grinder. And having grown up in Woodstock, I saw Putnam and Southbridge collapse around the same time. Putnam has made a comeback, has made an enormous comeback. And I have a lot of friends I grew up with that invested in Putnam, that bought properties. And one of the key locators for why they bought the property was the Riverfront Park. Now that park generates enormous revenue for small business by having events like the First Fridays and some special events, some fundraising events, types of things like that. So killing this, you're hurting business. You're hurting the small businesses of this town. And you're not only hurting the small businesses, you're hurting the property owners that own walking distance areas to this park. You know, there's a great little function hall, Marquise, that's about a quarter-mile away. They could possibly use this to send a horse and buggy for the wedding functions they have. There's probably a dozen other great ideas that you could come up with to turn this thing into a revenue generator. So I think what you're voting on today is just to say, let's look at the potential. If you don't do that, you're saying we don't want to be Putnam. We don't want to be Sturbridge. We want to stay like we are. And I think that's what you should think about. Thank you.
Any other comments on this agenda item? Sure, go ahead, Councilor Nash.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you. It's quite evident that many councilors have pointed out what I'll classify as faults within the process during this application and digging through the grant. I don't have an issue with that because I see faults as well. And I think we're all at fault if we haven't given the town manager better direction and given him other ideas with which to work. That is our charge. That's not his charge. I'm not satisfied that we don't have a formal land deal that's guaranteed. I also look at the application as everyone's referenced tonight, and I look at number 8, which I can let go, but it says describe outstanding leases, restrictions, or other rights or interests. It's the only other piece of information we've had to go on in regards to this piece of property. There's nothing. So yes, I too am a little bit critical, but I'm willing to get over it and take a leap of faith and say, you know what, it's in the master plan, okay. We've had one resident get up and speak to this issue tonight. If it's so critical, I wonder if others had the intention or if they just don't have faith in the council. So I'll be supporting this tonight, which is against my better judgment based on the issues that I presented. But I'll also state that, as I think Councilor Steves or Councilor Clements had stated, some of these issues have been outstanding for quite some time, and I would appreciate more expeditious answers in the future. Thank you.
Councilor DePietro.
Madam Chair, I started to allude to it, and you were kind of shaking your head, but I didn't get a yes or a no. Would a motion be acceptable to table this to the next meeting?
You make any motion you want, Councilor DePietro, and then this council votes on it, so your choice.
Well, then I would like to make that motion, Madam Chair.
Your motion is to postpone?
To postpone this vote until our next meeting. And allow time for further research and maybe for the town manager to answer a few answer questions. Doesn't give him a heck of a lot of time, but I think we're all on the fence here, and we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. I think is a general consensus.
So I believe you made a motion to postpone until the next meeting.
I have.
I won't second, but I will not be present at the next meeting for the record.
I'm not getting a second on that motion. So we're still at the main motion. Further discussion.
Just, if I may, through you, I just want to just say this. The most dangerous phrase in language is, we've always done it this way. and that was Admiral Grace Hopper. Southbridge can't continue to make the same mistakes. I know this is a risk, but this is, I think, a good risk where we can put an application forward and see what's the outcome. Because this is something that we can look at to generate economic development. Not only economic development, but the morale of our community. We can bring people together. We've seen the power of unity in this community. I mean, just last week, there was over 600 people at the Common. Every time we have an opportunity to bring community out, it comes out. And if we're able to provide another avenue for events, not only just events, but revenue, a place that can generate revenue, I hope this council would support that. We just can't keep doing the same things over and over and just letting it go by.
All set? Councilor Clare, do you have something?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I'll keep this brief. I just wanted to make a point. You know, there's obviously been a lot that's been said tonight. The master plan, and specifically the Riverside Park, that was through the master plan. I mean, we've had over the years, you know, Ted Carmen, who's a consultant. We've had all the people that were, you know, paid to do the master plan, you know, folks who are experts in their fields for economic development. We have our economic development director who we pay to make, you know, these types of decisions and recommendations, and they're overwhelmingly stating that we need to do this project. And I think there are a lot of you know, really good reasons to do this project. I think that, you know, Mr. Casperson brought up some really interesting ideas for revenue down the line that could offset the small amount of money that it's going to cost to upkeep this park. And I don't think it's prudent to, at this point, vote this project down against the advice of all of these different professionals in their respective fields, and, you know, the amount of work that's been done on this. So I hope that we can all, you know, see a little bit past somebody not meeting a deadline, or, you know, maybe not taking some kind of technicality on this project and getting upset about the timeline on it and killing the entire project just because of that. And I hope that we have a little more sense than that. Thank you.
Okay, Councilor McKenzie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have an economic development director who I think is doing a phenomenal job, and she's looking to go further with this project to enhance the economic development of the town. We also have a recreational director who I think is outstanding in a part-time basis. He works like it's full-time and does an outstanding job, and I think we need to give him the tools and the facilities to be able to advance our town as well. So therefore, and I applaud you, sir, therefore, I will be supporting this. I've made up my mind. I'm going to be supporting this project. Thank you.
All set? Okay. I think this could have been a great project if the piece of land were proper. I think that we should have had the input to converse with the property owner and to negotiate for a much better location with better waterfront, with better access to the river than what I walked and saw last week. A lot of flaws. That's my last comment. So anybody else? Seeing none, we're going to do this as a roll call. So do we all remember what we're voting on? Yeah. Okay, just make sure. All right, we're going to do this as a roll call, Max.
Councilor Clements?
No.
Councilor DePietro?
No.
Councilor McKenzie?
Yes.
Councilor Manna?
No.
Councilor Morales?
No.
Councilor Nash?
Yes.
Councilor Steves?
No.
I'm sorry?
No.
Councilor O'Clair?
Yes.
Councilor Carrasco?
Yes.
4 yes, 5 no.
Motion does not pass. Okay. Oh, Councilor's forum. Agenda item number 20. Councilor DePietro?
Nothing to report this evening, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councilor McKenzie?
Nothing to report this evening.
Thank you. Councilor Manna?
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. I just want to thank you, Madam Chair, and all your elves. They did a spectacular job this year on decorating the town, and it was a fabulous event. I was not involved with the decorations this year. I mean, you guys just outdid yourselves again, and the common looks beautiful. I'm sad to see the Christmas tree not in its original place, but it does take up that little area there, and it does add a little bit of extra, and coming downtown, it's just so pretty, and it makes me want to see the snow fall just for one day, that's all. and that's it. So thank you, and I won't keep you any longer because it's been a very long night.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Manna. Councilor Nash.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. Just a quick note that per our discussion at the General Government Subcommittee meeting last week, if you weren't present, I did create a page of notes. They weren't included in our packets, I don't think, at least not in mine. I'm happy to share, and I'll email them to everybody. It's not something I'm willing to give up on without further discussion. Thank you for making mention of it, Councilor Steves. Also, just want to note that if you haven't had opportunity to learn more about the All-In After-School program at West Street School, please do yourselves a favor, learn a little bit more about it. I know we had an email. Most of us must have had an email from someone in administration about it. Mr. Roenfeld's talked about it, and it was discussed during a school committee meeting not too long ago. I had an opportunity to go visit. Really kind of cool. And instead of my list, I'll just point out that the town manager has, through his office, released the annual report to the town council. Thank you for getting that done. You know I'm hot to trot on it, and I'm really grateful to see that promulgated. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, yes, sir.
Thank you,
Sorry.
Chair. Just to let you know, I know that we had sent out an initial document, and it turned out that when it was sent to me from Yvonne, we have different versions of Word, so it kind of screwed up the page lines and everything else. That's why we called it back and we sent you a new version. But I just want you to understand why we got it, because of the different versions. It just didn't translate in my version the same way. So you should have now a new copy of it that's clean and in nice shape. And we're going to be, if nobody has said any comments to us, so we're planning on putting it on the town website tomorrow.
Thank you.
All set?
Thank you.
Councilor Clare?
I'm all set, thank you.
Councilor Carrasco?
I just want to thank those that have worked hard in our community, and they keep working hard in our community. And I hope the direction of this council changes, because fighting and nitpicking over time and information and not turning a project away because of information or not being part of a conversation or not being part of something and not seeing the benefits and the hard work of those that are working with us is difficult, because the grass could be greener on the other side. And we have some great department heads that give some great work, and they get not treated fairly sometimes and are integrated rather than appreciated. So I don't know, but thank you to them that are working hard. I have nothing else to report. I'm just a little disappointed this evening.
Councilor Morales?
I'm all set, thank you.
Very good. Councilor Steves?
I'm all set tonight, too. And the next meeting will be December 18th, 2017 at 7 p.m. here in the chambers.
Thank you very much. Agenda item number 22 is vote to enter into executive session according to Mass General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, to consider negotiation of an airport lease if the chair declares that an open session may have detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the public body, which I do so declare. And then we will return to open session to vote and or to adjourn.
Second.
All those in, roll call, please. Yep.
Councilor DePietro? Councilor McKenzie? Councilor Manna?
Yes. Yes.
Councilor Morales?
Yes.
Councilor Nash?
Yes.
Councilor Steves?
Yes.
Councilor Clare?
Yes.
Councilor Carrasco? Councilor Clements?
Yes.
8 yes, 1 no.
Welcome back. We are back from executive session. Could we get a roll call, please?
Councilor O'Clair?
Present.
Councilor Carrasco? Councilor Clements?
Present.
Councilor DePietro? Present. Councilor McKenzie? Councilor Manna?
Present.
Councilor Morales?
Present.
Councilor Nash?
Present.
Councilor Steves?
Present.
7 present.
Thank you. So we have agenda item number 23, vote to ratify the lease agreement between the Town of Southbridge and Norby Aviation LLC according to the term herein described for 400 square meters of office space located at the Southbridge Municipal Airport.
Second.
Discussion. Do you want to say anything about the item? Since the public doesn't know, we just did.
No, this is a lease agreement between Norby Aviation and the town of Southbridge, specifically the airport. This has been worked on between the Airport Commission and Town Council for a matter of months, that this issue has been addressed. Essentially, they're going to be renting about 400 square feet of office space at the airport for a flight school. And they expect it, they'll be up there in January, February, March, but it will really seriously begin in April when they'll be taking customers and teaching them how to fly. We believe it's going to be a true asset to the airport, and hopefully we'll bring in more traffic and more business into our airport. I think everyone agrees in the Airport Commission that this is a responsible lease, and it will benefit the town as a whole.
Thank you very much. Any questions or concerns? Seeing none, roll call on this one.
Councilor Manna?
Yes.
Councilor Morales?
Yes.
Councilor Nash?
Yes.
Councilor Steves?
Yes.
Councilor O'Clair?
Yes.
Councilor Clements?
Yes.
Councilor DePietro?
Yeah.
7 yes.
Motion passes. Motion passes.
Thank you, everybody.
Motion to adjourn? All those in favor? We're done.